must be in want of a wife. Chapter 1. It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife. However little known the feelings or views of such a man may be on his first entering a neighborhood, this truth is so well fixed in the minds of the surrounding families that he is considered the rightful property of some one or other of their daughters. "My dear Mr. Bennet," said his lady to him one day, "have you heard that Netherfield Park is let at last?" Mr. Bennet replied, "But it is," replied she, "for Mrs. Long has just been there, and she told me all about it." Mr. Bennet made no answer. "Do you not want to know who has taken it?" cried his wife. "You want to tell me, and I have no objection to hearing it." "Why, my dear, you must know. Mrs. Long says that Netherfield is taken by a young man of large fortune from the north of England, that he came down on Monday in a chaise and four to see the place, and was so much delighted with it that he agreed with Mr. Morris immediately that he is to take possession before Michaelmas, and some of his servants are to be in the house by the end of next week." "What is his name?" "Bingley." "Is he married or single?" "Oh, single, my dear, to be sure. A single man of large fortune, 4,000 or 5,000 a year. What a fine place." How can it affect plans? "My dear Mr. Bennet," replied his wife, "be so tiresome. You must know that I am thinking of his marrying."
Sonnet 1.
"Is that his design?"
From fairest creatures we desire
nonsense! How can you talk so?
that
But it is very
thereby
likely that
beauty's rose might never die.
and therefore you must
But
visit him as soon as
as
he
the
comes.
writer should by time decease,
I see no occasion for that.
tender air
You and the girls may go, or you may send them by themselves, which perhaps would be still better. For as you are as handsome as any of them,
contract
Mr.
to
Bingley
thine
may like you
own
the best.
bright eyes, feeds thy light flame with self-substantial fuel, making a famine where abundance lies. Thyself thy foe.
When a woman has 5 grown-up
sweet
daughters,
self
she ought to
to
give over
cool.
thinking of her own beauty.
Thou that art now the world's
such cases,
fresh
a woman
ornament
has
and
not
only herald to the gaudy spring,
But my dear, you must
within
go and see
thine
Mr. Bingley when he
own
comes
bud
into the neighbourhood.
buryest thy content,
It is more than I engage
tender
for,
churl
I assure you.
makes waste
But consider your
in niggardly.
daughters. Only think what an establishment it would be for one of them.
else this
Sir
glutton
William and
lady
Lady Lucas are determined to go,
eat the
merely on that
world's
account, for in general,
by the
you know,
way
they visit no
recruitment facility.
Indeed, you must go, for it will be impossible for us to visit him
street level
if you do not.
recruitment.
You are over-scrupulous, surely. I dare say Mr. Bingley will be very glad to see you, and I will send a few lines by you to assure him of my hearty consent to his marrying whichever he chooses of the girls.
You're in our virtual
Though
training
I must
courses.
throw in a
We
good word
provide
for
you
my
with a
little
simulated cyber interface. This
I
training
desire
interface is
you will
identical
do
to
no such
Grammarly helps you work more efficiently, which makes accomplishing your work goals
And I am
easier.
sure she is not half so handsome as Jane,
Sonnet
nor half so
3.
good-humoured as
That
Lydia.
means you're in shoot mode.
But you are always giving
Look in thy
challenges.
glass and tell the face
Puts you
thou
in use
viewest.
mode.
They have
Now
none
is
of
the
much to
time
recommend
that
by
face
side.
should fall.
They're all silly and ignorant like other girls, but Lizzie
Flesh
has
with
something
air,
more
if
of a
now thou
picture
not
than her
renewest,
sister.
thou dost beguile the world.
Bennet, how can you
Unbless
use
some
your own
mother.
children in such a way?
And where is she
Take
so
delight
fair,
in
whose
vexing
unearned
me?
womb
passion
disdains
for
the
my
tillage of thy
boy.
husband?
Changing between modes until
You
Or who
mistake
is
me, my
he
dear.
so fond will
I
be
have a
the
high
tomb of
respect
his
for your
self-love to
my
stop
old friend.
posterity?
I have heard you mention them with consideration these last 20 years.
This will automatically place that item into
You
your
do not know what I
view your
suffer.
inventory. Press the tab.
But I hope you will get over it and live to see many young men of 4,000 a year come into the neighborhood. It will be no use to us if 20 such should come, since you will not visit them.
One of the most important
Depend upon it, my dear,
learn about jumping and
that when there are 20,
But
You've done well.
if thou live, remember not to
Any
be.
aspect of what you've just
Mr.
learned.
Bennett
single-
was so odd a mixture of quick
thy
parts,
image dies with
sarcastic humor, reserve, and caprice, that the experience of 23 years had been insufficient to make his
Sonnet
wife
4.
understand his character.
Provided. Here's where you make your
Her mind.
Unthrifty loveliness, why dost thou spend
She
upon
was a woman
thyself
of mean
thy
understanding,
beauty's
little
legacy?
information, and uncertain temper.
Nature's bequest.
When she was
Give
discontented, she
nothing,
fancied herself
but doth
nervous.
lend.
The
And
business
being
of her
frank,
life was to get
she
her daughters
lends to
married.
those are free.
Its solace was
Then,
visiting.
beauteous niggard, why dost thou abuse the bounteous largesse given thee to give?
Mr. Bennett was
Profitless
among...
usurer,
Sorry.
why dost thou use so great a sum of sums,
Wrong
yet
confidence.
canst not live?
Mr. Bennett was among the
For having
earliest
traffic
those who waited
with
on the
thyself
beginning.
alone,
He had always
thou
intended
of
to
thyself,
though to
thy
the last
sweet
always
self
assuring
dost
his
deceive.
wife that he should not go.
Then how,
Until the evening
when
after
nature
the visit was
calls
paid,
thee to
she
be
had no
gone,
knowledge of it.
what acceptable
It was then
audit canst thou
disclosed
leave?
in the following manner.
Thy unused
Observing his
beauty
second daughter
must
employed in
be
trimming a hat, he
tuned
suddenly
with
addressed
thee.
her with,
Which
I hope
you
Mr.
said
Bingley will like it, Lizzie.
lives the executor to be.
We are not in a way to know what Mr. Bingley likes, said her mother
Well,
resentfully,
I have
since we
a
are not to
confession
visit.
and an apology
But you
to make,
forget,
because
Mamma,
I'm not going to
said
do
Elizabeth,
solid fire.
that we shall meet him at the
It's too
assembly,
hard.
and that
I've
Mrs.
been
Long
working
promised
on
to
it all
introduce him.
And I just don't
I do
think
not
I
believe
can do it
Mrs.
justice,
Long will do any
because I
such
don't
thing. She has two
understand.
nieces of her own.
So we're moving
She is
on
a
to
selfish,
sonnet 6.
hypocritical woman, and
Now,
I have
sonnet
no
6
opinion
and
of
sonnet
her.
5 actually go together. Just
OSA welcomes
try
you
to
to Orbital
remember that
Station
while I'm
Charlotte. Ready yourself
No
to
more
feel
have I, said
Then
Mr.
let
Bennett,
not
and I am
winter's
glad to find
ragged
that you do
hand
not depend
defacing
on her
thee by
serving you.
summer, ere thou
Mrs.
be
Bennett
distilled.
deigned not to
Mix
make any
sweet
reply,
summer
but unable to contain herself
treasure
against
of
scolding
some
her
place
daughters.
with beauty's
Don't keep
treasure,
coughing
ere
so,
it be
Kitty, for
self-killed.
heaven's sake. Have a
That
little
use
compassion on
is
my
not
nerves.
forbidden
Tear them to
usury,
pieces.
which happy is those
Kitty
that
has no
pay the
discretion
willing
in her
love.
coughs, said her father.
That's for
She times
thyself
the meal.
to breed another
Do not
thee.
cough for my own
Or
amusement.
10 times happier,
replied Kitty
be it
fretfully.
10 for 1.
When is your
10
noble to
times
be?
thyself were happier
Tomorrow
than thou
fortnight.
art, if 10
Ah,
of thine 10
so it is,
times
cried her mother. And
refigured.
Mrs. Long does not come back till the day before, so it will be
Then
impossible
what
for her
would
to
death
introduce
do
him, for she will
if
not
thou
know him
shouldst
herself.
depart, leaving thee
Then, my
little?
dear, you may have the advantage of your friend and
Be
introduce
not
him.
self-willed,
an eternal
for thou
Impossible,
art
Mr. Bennett,
much too
impossible.
fair to be
When I'm not
death's
acquainted with him
conquest.
myself, how can you be so
Make
teasing?
worms thine heir.
I honor your circumspection. A fortnight's acquaintance is certainly very little. One cannot know what a man really is.
I'm quite an adventurous person.
To me, business is a sport.
So what did they say when you pulled up?
They were like,
We up in here, man.
Do you consider the forms of introduction and the stress that is laid on them as nonsense? I cannot quite agree with you there. What say you, Mary? What say you, Mary? For you are a young lady of deep
In the
reflection,
first
I
line,
know, and
there
read
are
great
two
books and
words,
make extracts.
gracious light. In this
Mary
sonnet,
wished to say
it
something
means
sensible,
the
but
sun.
knew not how. While
Lo,
Mary suggested
in the
her
orient
idea,
when the gracious
Yeah,
light
that's
lifts up his burning head,
I am
each
sick
under
of
eye
individually.
does homage to his new appearing
Sorry
sight,
to hear that.
serving with
Did you not
looks
tell me that?
his sacred majesty.
If I had known as
And
much
having
as this woman, I
climbed the
certainly
steep
would
of
not have paid
heavenly
her.
hill, resembling
Very
strong
unlucky.
youth,
But as I have
in
actually
his
paid the
middle
visit, we
age,
cannot escape the acquaintance
yet
now.
mortal looks adore
astonishment
his
of the ladies
beauty
is just
still,
what he did.
attending
That of
on
Mrs.
his
Bennet
golden
perhaps a passing
pilgrimage.
breast, though.
But when
Perhaps
from highmost
surpassing the
pitch
rest.
with weary car,
Though,
like
when the first
feeble
tumult of
age,
joy was over, she began to
reeleth
declare
from
that it
the
was
day.
what she had expected.
The eyes, for
How
duteous,
good it was in
now
you, my
converted
dear
are
Ben.
from his
But I
low
knew I
craft,
should persuade you at
and
last.
look another way.
I was sure you loved your girls too well
So
to neglect
thou,
such an acquaintance.
thyself
Well, how
outgoing in thy
pleased I
living,
am. And it is such a
unlooked
good
on,
joke, too, that you should have gone
diest,
this morning and never said a word about it till now.
unless thou get a son.
Now, Kitty, you may
I
come
wonder
as
if
you
the
choose.
use of the word car,
And as he spoke, he
was
left
the
the
first
room,
time that word was
fatigued
ever used
with the rapture that
in
was won.
English verse. It
What
means
an
chariot.
excellent father you have, girls, said she when the door was shut.
Sonnet
I do not know
8.
how you will ever make him... What?
Music.
I do not know how you will ever make him amends for his
Hearest thou
kindness.
music,
Or
sadly,
me either, for that matter.
Sweets
At our time of life,
with
it is not
sweets
so
worn
pleasant,
out,
I can tell
joy
you, to be making new
delights in
acquaintances
joy.
every day. But for your
Why
sakes,
lovest thou
we would do
that
anything.
which thou receivest
Lydia,
not
my
glad,
love, though you are
or
the
else
youngest, I
receives
dare
with
say
pleasure
else
thine
would say
annoy?
so.
If the true
said Lydia
concord
stoutly.
of well-tuned
I am not
sounds
afraid, for
by
though I am
unions
the
married
youngest,
do
I
offend
will
thine ear, they do
The rest of the evening was spent in
sweetly
conjecturing
chide
how
thee,
soon he would
who
return Mr. Bennet's
confounds
visit,
in
and
singleness the parts that thou shouldst
and
bear.
determining when they should ask him
Mark
for dinner.
how one string, sweet
You want
husband
another one, or
to
are we
another,
done?
strikes
What do you think?
each in each by mutual order, resembling sire
Maybe
and
we'll
child
break,
and happy
and
mother,
then I'll do some more.
who all in one pleasing note
You guys
do
will
sing,
see.
whose speechless
Quarantine.
song, being
Sorry,
many,
guys.
seeming one, sings this to thee. Thou singing will prove none.
Rely on your cyber interface. It just might save your life. You must find an elevator and come up to deck 4 to
Well,
Focus.
I'm going to do Sonnet 10
keep your
because
eyes open. They're
I
after us
don't
both
like
now.
Sonnet 9.
Oh, that's
Now,
better.
You can read
Hello.
it yourselves and make that decision.
Very.
But I found it offensive,
Lovely hand sound.
so I'm not going to do it.
Chapter 3.
So, Sonnet 10.
Not all but Mrs. Bennet, however,
For shame, deny that thou bearest love
could
to
ask on the
any,
subject
who
was
for
sufficient to draw
thyself
from her
art
husband
so unprofitable.
a description of his
Grant,
behaviour,
if thou wilt, thou
their
art
tact
beloved of
and various
many,
ways.
but that thou
Barefaced
none
questions,
lovest
ingenious
is no sin.
suppositions, and distant surmises,
For
that
thou
he
art so
eluded the
possessed
skill
with
of the
murderous
law.
hate, that
And they
against
were at last
thyself
obliged
thou
to
stickst
accept
not to
second-hand
conspire,
intelligence
seeking
that
that
labour
beauteous
has
roof to
Overall,
ruinate,
it was highly
which to
favourable.
repair
Mr. William
should be
had
thy
been
chief
delighted.
desire.
He was quite young.
Oh,
wonderfully
change
handsome,
that thought,
extremely agreeable,
that I may
and
change my
crown of all,
mind.
he meant to
Shall
be the
hate
next assembly.
be fairer lodged than gentle
Nothing could
love?
be more delightful.
Be as
To
thy
be fond of
presence
dancing with
is,
certain steps
gracious
before
and kind,
and very lively
or to
hopes of his
thyself
heart.
at least, kind-hearted prove.
If I can but
Make
see
thee
one of my daughters
another
happy,
self,
so
for
that
love
Mrs.
of
Bennet,
you,
her husband,
that
and all the
beauty
others equally
still
well
may
married,
live
I shall
in
have nothing
thine.
to wish for. In a few days, Mr. Bingley returned Mr. Bennet's visit and sat about 10 minutes with him in his library.
So let's say you have
He
to
had
read an
entertained
incredibly
hopes of
long
being
email from your boss that you have to finish before the big meeting starts in 10 minutes.
Much, but he saw only the father.
Sonnet
The ladies
11.
were somewhat more fortunate, for they had the
As
advantage
fast
of
as thou shalt
ascertaining
wane,
out that he
so
wore a blue
fast
coat.
thou growest in one of thine, from that which thou
An invitation to
departest.
dinner was soon afterwards
And
dispatched,
that fresh
and already
blood
had Mrs.
which
Bennet
youngly
planned
thou
courses
bestowest,
that would be
thou
conducted
mayest
domestically.
call
When an
thine,
answer arrived which
when thou
deferred it all,
from youth
Mr. Bingley was
convertest.
obliged to be in town the following day and
Herein
consequently unable to
is
accept the
wisdom,
honour of their
beauty,
invitation, etc.
and increase.
Mrs. Bennet was quite disconcerted.
Without this,
She could
folly,
not imagine what
age,
business he could have in
and
town so
cold
soon after his
decay.
arrival in Hertfordshire, and she began to
If
fear that he
all
might
were
be
minded
blind
so,
about
the
what
time
he
should
was doing,
cease,
and never
and
settled the
80
matter
year would make the world away.
Lady Lucas quieted her fears a little
Let
by
those
starting the idea of
whom
his being
nature
gone to
hath
London
not
only
made
to
for
get a large
store,
party.
harsh, featureless,
and the
and
report soon
wounded,
followed
barrenly
that Mr. Bingley
hellish.
was
Look
to bring
whom
12
she
ladies,
has bestowed.
7 gentlemen,
She
with
gave
her,
them more.
the girls
Bounteous
was
gifts,
such a
thou
number.
shouldst in bounty
But were comforted
cherish.
the day before the ball by
She
hearing
carved
that
thee
instead of
for her
12,
seal,
he brought them
and
6
meant thereby thou
his
shouldst
5
print
sisters
more.
and a cousin. And when the party entered the assembly room, it consisted of only 5 altogether. Mr. Bingley, his 2 sisters, the husband of the eldest,
Sonnet 12.
and another young man.
I hope you're ready.
Mr. Bingley was good-looking and gentlemanlike. He had a pleasant countenance and
When I
easy
do
and
count the
unaffected.
clock that tells the
His
time
sisters
and
were
see the
fine
brave
women,
day
with an
sunk
air
in
of decided
hideous
fashion.
night,
His
when I
brother-in-law, Mr.
behold
Hurst,
the
merely looked
violet
the gentleman.
past prime,
But his friend
and
Mr.
sable
Darcy soon drew the
curls
attention
all
of the room by
silvered
his
all
fine,
with
tall
white,
person,
when lofty
handsome
trees I
features,
see barren
noble
of
mien,
leaves, which
and the
erst
report
from
which was
heat
in general
did canopy
circulated
the
within
herd,
5 minutes of his entry.
and summer's
of his
green
having
all
turned.
girded up in sheaves, borne on the
The
bier
gentlemen
with
pronounced
white
him to
and
be a
bristly
fine
beard.
figure of a man. The ladies
Then
declared he was much
Of thy
handsomer,
beauty do I question
and he
make,
was looked at with great
that thou,
admiration for about
among the
half
wastes
the
of
evening,
time,
till his manners
must go.
gave a disgust which
Since
turned the tide of his
sweets and
popularity.
beauties do
For he was
themselves
discovered
forsake and die as fast
to be above
as
his
they
company,
see others grow.
and above being pleased.
And
And not
nothing
all his
against
large estate in
time's
Derbyshire
side
could then save
can
him
make
from having a most
defense.
forbidding,
Save
disagreeable countenance, and being
breed
unworthy to be compared
to
with
brave
his friend.
him when he takes thee
Mr.
hence.
Bingley had soon made himself acquainted with all the principal people in the room. He was lively and unreserved, danced every dance.
Since I started
was
Noom,
angry
I've
at
lost
ball
70
closed
pounds.
so
I've
early
lost
and told
97
of
pounds
doing
with Noom.
himself.
I've lost 92 pounds on Noom.
Such
I'm a stress
amiable
eater.
qualities must speak for
Sonnet
themselves.
13.
What a contrast between him.
Oh, that you were yourself.
Mr. Darcy.
But love, you are no longer
danced only once
yours than
with
you
Mrs.
yourself here live.
once with Miss Bingley.
Against
Declined being
this
introduced
coming
to any
end
other lady,
you should
and
prepare,
spent the rest of the evening
and
in
your
walking
sweet
about the room,
semblance
speaking
to some
occasionally to
other
one of his
give.
own party.
So should that beauty
character
which you
was
hold in
decided.
lease
He
find
was
no
the proudest,
determination,
disagreeable man
then you were
in the world,
yourself
and everybody
again
hoped he would never
after
come to
yourselves deceased.
Amongst the most
For
violent
your
against
sweet
Mrs. Bennet,
issue,
whose
your
dislike of his
sweet
general
form
behaviour was sharpened in
prevailed.
particular resentment by his having slighted
Who
her.
let so fair a house fall to decay?
Elizabeth Bennet had been obliged by the scarcity
Which
of
husbandry
gentlemen to
in
sit
honour
down
might
to
uphold
dance.
against the
And during
stormy
his
gusts of
conduct, Mr.
winter's
Darcy, when
day
standing near
and
enough,
barren
but he had heard
rage
to
of
hear a
death's
conversation between him
eternal
and Mr.
cold?
Bingley, who came from the dance for a
Oh,
few minutes
none
to press his friend
but
to join him.
unthrifts.
Come, Darcy,
Dear my
said
love,
he,
you
I must have you
know.
dance. I hate to
You
see you
had a
standing about by
father.
yourself in this stupid manner. You had much
Let
better
your
dance.
son say so.
I certainly shall not. You know how I detest it, unless I am particularly acquainted with my partner.
Sonnet 14.
At such an assembly as this, it would be insupportable.
Not from the
Your
stars
sisters are
do I
engaged,
my
and there is not
judgment,
another woman in the room whom
and yet
it would not be a
methinks I
punishment
have a
to
strong,
me to stand up with.
but not to tell of good.
I would
or
not be
evil,
so fastidious
of
as you
plagues,
are, cried
of
Mr. Bingley,
deaths,
for a
or
kingdom.
season's quality.
On my honour, I never met
Nor
with so
can
many pleasant
I,
girls in my life as I have this
fortunate to
evening,
brief
and there
minutes
are
tell,
several of them. who
pointing
seem
to each his thunder, rain, and wind.
You are dancing with
All
the only
say
handsome
with
girl in the room,
princes,
said Mr.
if
Darcy,
it shall
looking
go
at the eldest
well,
Miss Bennet.
I oft predict
Oh,
that I
she is the
have
most beautiful creature I ever beheld. But there is one of her sisters sitting down just behind you, who is very pretty, and I dare say very agreeable.
I do.
Do let me ask my partner
And
to introduce you.
constant stars.
Which do you mean?
In
And turning
them
round, he looked
I
for a
lead
moment
such
at Elizabeth,
art as
till catching her
truth
eye,
and
he
beauty
withdrew his own and coldly
against
said,
the
She is fallen.
from thyself
Not handsome enough to tempt me. I am in no humour at present to give consequence to young ladies who are slighted by other men.
with thee.
You had better return to
this
your partner and
I
enjoy her
prognosticate.
smiles. For
The
you are wasting
end
your time with me.
is truth and beauty's
Mr. Bingley followed his
doom.
advice. Mr. Darcy walked off,
date.
and Elizabeth remained with no very cordial feelings toward him.
Tough.
She told the story, however, with great spirit among her
Hello,
friends, for
this
she
is
had a
Sonnet
lively,
15,
playful disposition,
and
which
I
delighted in
have found it
its
very, very difficult
The evening altogether.
I understand what the overall sense is,
Mrs. Bennet
but
had seen her
words have different meanings and they seem to leap off the
Mr.
page
Bingley
in confusion.
and she had been distinguished by this.
When I consider
Jane was as
everything
much
that
gratified by
grows,
this as
holds
Elizabeth
in perfection
though quiet.
but a little moment,
Elizabeth felt
that this
Jane
huge stage presenteth
Mary had heard
naught
herself
but
mentioned to Miss
shows,
Bingley as the
whereon the
most
stars
accomplished
in
girl in the
secret
neighbourhood, and Catherine and Lydia had been fortunate
gonna have to
enough
stop
never
here.
to be without partners, which was all that they
when I
had yet
consider
learned to care for.
everything that grows, holds
They
in
returned,
perfection
therefore, in good
but a
spirits
little
along
moment,
the village
that this
where they lived,
huge
and of
stage
which they were the
presenteth
principal
naught but shows, whereon the
They found
stars
Mr.
in
Bennet
secret
still
influence
up.
comment.
With a book, he was
When I
regarded
perceive that
and
men
on the
as
present occasion
plants
he had a good deal of
increase,
curiosity as to the event
cheered
of the
and
evening
checked
which had
even
raised
by the
such
self-served
splendid
sky,
expectations.
vaunt
He had
in
rather
their
hoped that his
youthful
wife's
sap,
views on the
at
stranger
height
would be disappointed.
decrease,
But
and
he
where their
soon found
brave
out
state
that he
out
had a
of
different
memory.
story to hear.
Then the conceit
Oh,
of
my
this
dear Mr.
inconstant
Bennet,
stay
as she entered
sets
the room, we
you
have had a
most
most
rich
delightful
in
evening, a
youth
most excellent
before my
ball.
sight,
I
where
wish
wasteful
you had
time
been there.
debateth
Jane
with
was so
decay
admired
to
that it
change
could be
your
done.
day of youth
Everybody said
to
how well she
sullied
looked,
night,
and Mr. Bingley thought her quite
and
beautiful.
all
she
in war
danced
with
with her
time,
twice.
for
Oh,
love of
think
you,
that, my dear.
as he
actually
takes from you.
danced with her twice.
I engraft you.
And she was the only creature in the room that he asked a second time. First of all, he asked Lucas. I was so vexed to see him stand up with her. But however, he did not admire her at all.
Hello.
Indeed, nobody cared.
We're outside.
And he seemed
Because
quite struck with Jane as
this
she was
next
going down the dance.
uses
So he inquired who she was,
growing
what did taste, and asked her for the two notes.
procreation.
Then the 2/3 he danced with Miss King, and the 2/4 with Maria Lucas, and the 2/5 with Jane again, and the 2/6 with Lizzie, and the Bollinger. If he had had any compassion for me, cried her husband impatiently, he would not have danced half so much. For God's sake, so no more of his partners.
And
Oh, that
fortify
he's
yourself
angry
in your
with her.
decay with means more blessed
Oh, my dear,
than my
I am
barren rhyme.
delighted with him. He is so
Now stand you on the top of
And his
happy
sisters
hours
are
and many maiden
never in my life saw
gardens,
any
yet
elegant
unset
dresses.
with
I
virtuous
dare
wish
say the lace
would bear
on
your
Mrs.
living
Hurst's
flower.
gown. Here she was
Much
interrupted
liker
again. Mr.
than your
Bennet
painted
protested
counterfeit.
any description.
So should the lines of
She was
life
therefore
bright
obliged
her,
to seek another
which this
drawing
time's
subject,
pencil
related
or
to
my
much bitterness
pupil
of spirit and
pen,
some exaggeration
neither
of the
in
shocking
inward
rudeness of
worth
Mr. Darcy.
nor outward fair
I can assure you
can make you
that
live
Lizzie does
yourself
not lose much by
in
his,
eyes of men.
by not suiting his fancy.
To give
He
away
is a most
yourself
disagreeable, horrid man,
keeps
not at all
yourself
worth pleasing.
still,
So high and so
and
conceited.
you must
There
live
was no enduring him.
drawn by
He
your
walked
own
here, he
sweet
walked
skill.
there, fancying himself so very great, not handsome enough to dance with.
The Honest Truly Calming Collection is our must-have for Hazy's nighttime routine.
Quite to test the man.
Hello,
Chapter 4.
we've reached
When Jane and
sonnet
Elizabeth were
17.
alone, the
And
former,
that means
who had
that
been
we've
cautious in her
reached
praise of Mr.
a
Bingley
sort of
before,
mini
expressed to her
landmark
sister just
point
how
in
very
these
much she admired him.
154 sonnets,
He's
because
just what a
right
young
up to
man
sonnet
ought to be,
17,
said she.
Mr.
Sensible,
Shakespeare has
good-humoured,
been writing
lively.
on one particular
And I
theme,
never saw such happy
trying to
manners.
persuade
So
this
much
gorgeous
ease,
young man
and such
that he
perfect
should
breeding.
have a child, not just to
Also
continue
handsome,
the family
replied Elizabeth, which a young
name
man
and
would
reputation,
likewise to be if he possibly
but
could.
his own
His
personal
character is
beauty.
thereby
After 17, the tone
very
changes,
much
and
flattered by
I'm
his
thinking I
asking
might
for
say a little bit about that
I didn't
tomorrow.
expect such a
But for now, one of my favorite
know?
sonnets,
I'm just going to end it for a minute.
17. Who will believe my verse in time to come? If it were filled with... I'm going to begin again. Who will believe my verse in time to come? If it were filled with your most high desert. Though yet...
Did you not?
You know what? I've got to stop again. I'm sorry.
But that is
And
one.
it's
That is one
desserts,
great
not
difference
desserts.
between us. Compliments always take you by surprise, and he never. What
Who
could be
will
more natural
believe
than his
my
asking you
words
again?
in time
He
to
could not
come,
help seeing that you
if
were
it were
about 5
filled
times
with
as
your
pretty as
most
every other
high
woman in the room.
deserts?
No thanks
Oh
to
yes,
his gallantry for
heaven
that.
knows
Well,
it is
certainly
but as
is
a
very
tomb,
agreeable. I give you
which
leave to like
hides
him.
your
You've liked
life
many a stupid
and
old
shows not half your parts.
Oh, you are
If
a
I
great
could
deal
write
too apt, you know, to
the
like
beauty
people
of
in
your
general.
eye,
You never see a fault in
and in
anybody.
fresh
All the
numbers
world are good and
number
agreeable in your
all
eyes.
your
I never heard you
graces,
speak ill of a human being in
the
your
age
life.
to come would say,
I would not wish
this
to be hasty in
poet
censoring
lies.
anyone, but I always
Such
speak
heavenly
lightly.
touches
I know
ne'er
you do, and
touched
it is that
earthly
which is the
faces.
wonder. With your
So
good
should my
sense to be so
papers
honestly
yellow
blind to the
with their
follies and
age,
nonsense of others.
be
Affection of
scorned
candour
like
is
old
common enough.
men of less truth
Affectation
than
of
tongue.
candour is common enough.
And your
One
true
meets with it
rights
everywhere.
return the
But
poet's
to be
brain
candid without
and
ostentation or
stretch a
design, to
meter
take the good of
of an
everybody's
antique
character
song.
and make it still better, and say nothing of the
But
bad.
were some child of yours
And so you
alive
like this
that
man's
time,
sisters, too, do you?
you should live
Their
twice
manners are not equal to his.
in it
Certainly not, at
and
first.
in my life.
But they are very pleasing women when you converse with them. Miss
After I
Bingley is to
finish
live with
the
her brother
sonnet
and keep his
I
house,
suggested,
and I am
I
much
will
mistaken if we shall not find a very charming neighbour.
I thought we'd stop recording, and I said, was that all right? Actually, that was not a joke.
Their behaviour at the assembly had not been calculated to please in general, and with more quickness of observation and less pliancy of temper than her sister, and with a
Sonny, thank you so much.
herself, she was very little disposed. They were, in fact, very kind, efficient and reasonable when they were pleased, nor in the power of making themselves agreeable when they chose it, but proud and conceited. They were rather handsome, had been educated in one of the first private seminaries in town, had a fortune of £20,000, were in the habit of spending more than they ought, and of associating with people of rank, and were therefore in every respect entitled to think well of themselves, and meanly of others.
Devouring time.
They were of a respectable
Blunt
family
thou
in
the
the north of
lion's
England.
paws, and make the earth devour her own
deeply
sweet
impressed on their
brood.
memories, than
Pluck
their
the
brother's
keen
fortune
teeth
ever
from the
had
fierce
been
tiger's
acquired
jaws,
by trade.
and burn the long-lived phoenix
Mr.
in
Bingley
her
inherited
blood.
property to the amount of nearly
Make glad
£100,000
and sorry
from his father, who
seasons
had intended
as thou
to purchase the
fleetst,
estate,
and do whatever
but
thou
did not live
wilt,
to do it.
swift-footed time,
Mr. Bingley
to the wide
intended
world and all
likewise,
her
and
fading
sometimes
sweets.
made choice of his county. But as he was now
I
provided
forbid
with a good
thee
house
one most
and the liberty of
heinous
a manor,
crime.
and it was doubtful
O
to many of
carve not
those who
with
best
thy
knew the
hours
easiness
my
of his
love's
temper,
fair
whether
brow,
he might not spend
nor
the
draw no
remainder of his
lines
days
there
at
with thine
Netherfield,
antique
and leave the
pen.
next generation
Him
purchase.
in thy course
His sisters
untainted
were
do
anxious for
allow
his having
for
expert
beauty's
of own.
pattern
But,
to
though he
succeed
was
in
now
men.
only established as a tenant, Miss
Yet
Bingley was by no means
do thy
unwilling to
worst,
reside at his
O
table.
time,
Nor was Mrs.
despite
Hurst,
thy
who had married a
wrong,
man of
my love
fashion
shall in my verse
less disposed to
ever
consider his
live
house as
young.
her home when it suited her. Mr. Bingley had not been of age 2 years when he was tempted by an accidental recommendation to look at Netherfield House. He did look at it, and into it for half an hour, was pleased with the situation in the principal rooms, satisfied with what the owner said in his praise, and took it immediately. Between him and Darcy there was a very steady friendship, in spite of great oppositions of character. Bingley was endeared to Darcy by the easiness, openness, and ductility of his temper, though no disposition could offer a great contrast to his own, and though with his own he never appeared dissatisfied. On the strength of Darcy's regard, Bingley had the firmest reliance, and on his judgment the highest opinion. In understanding it, Darcy was his superior.
Who
Bingley was
heaven
by no
itself
means
for
derisive,
ornaments doth use,
but Darcy
and
was
every
clever.
fair with his fair
He was at the
doth
same
wear
time
less,
haughty, reserved,
making
and
a
fastidious.
compliment
But
of
his
proud
manners,
compare,
though well
with
bred,
sun and
were
moon,
not in
with earth
In
and
that respect,
sea,
his friend
rich
had greatly the
gems,
advantage.
with
Bingley was
April's
sure of
first
being
born
liked
flowers,
forever.
and all things rare,
Darcy
that heaven's air this huge frondure heavens.
The manner in which they spoke of the Meryton Assembly was sufficiently characteristic.
True
Bingley had
in
never
love,
met with more pleasant
but
people or prettier
truly
girls in his
right.
life. Everybody
And
had been
then
most
he
kind
knew
and attentive to him.
my
There had been no
life is
formality,
as
no
fair as
stiffness.
any
He had
mother's
soon felt
child,
acquainted with all
though
the room.
not so
As
bright
to
as
Miss
those gold
Bennet, he
candles
could not
fixed
conceive an
in
angel
heaven's air.
Darcy, on the
Let them
contrary,
say
had seen a
more
collection of
that
people in
like
whom
a
there was little
hearsay
beauty
well.
and no fashion,
I will
whom-
not
for
praise
none of
that
whom he had felt the
purpose,
smallest
not
interest.
to sell.
and from none received either attention
true.
or pleasure. Miss Bennet, he acknowledged to be pretty.
So let's say you have to read an incredibly long email from your boss that you
Mrs.
have to
Hurst
finish
and
before the
sister
big meeting.
allowed it to be so. But still they admired her, liked her, and pronounced her to be a sweet girl, and one whom they would not object to know more of. Miss Bennet was therefore established as a sweet girl, and her brother felt authorized by such accommodation to think of her as a child. Chapter 5.
As an unperfect
Within a short walk of
on the
Longbourn
stage,
lived a family
who with his
Bennets were
fear
particularly
is
fond
put
of.
beside his
Sir
path.
William Lucas had been formerly
Some
in
fierce
trade in
thing
Meredith,
replete
where he
with too
obtained
much
tolerable
rage,
fortune, and
whose
risen to the
strength's
honour of knighthood
abundance
by an address to the king
weakens his
during
own
his mayor.
heart.
This word
So I, for
Mayoralty.
fear of trust, forget to say the
During his
perfect
mayoralty.
ceremony of
The
love's
distinction-
flight. And in
the
my
distinction
own
had
love's
perhaps been
strength seemed to decay.
It had given him
Fortunate
a
with
disgust
burden
to
of my
his
own
business
love's might.
and to his residence in a small
Oh,
market
let my
town.
books with
And in
envy
quitting them both, he had removed
and dumb
with his family to a
presages
house
of
about a
my
mile from
speaking
Meryton,
breast.
denominated from
Plead
that
for
period
love
as
and look for
Market,
recompense,
where he could think
more
with
than
pleasure
that
of his own
tongue,
importance,
that more
and
hath more
unshackled by
expressed.
business, occupy himself
Oh,
solely in being civil
Learn
to
to
all the
read
world.
what
For, though
silent
elated
love
by
hath
his
used.
rank, it did not render him supercilious.
hear
On the contrary, he was all attention to everybody.
belongs to
By nature
love's
inoffensive, friendly, and obliging, his presentation at St. James's had made him courteous.
Sonnet
Lady
24.
Lucas was a very good kind of woman, not too clever to be
Mine
valuable
eye
by
hath
Mrs.
played the painter,
They had several
and hath
children.
stelled thy
The eldest
beauty's
of them, a
form
sensible, intelligent
in
young
table
woman,
of my
about
heart.
27, was
My
Elizabeth's
body
intimate friend.
is the frame wherein
That
'tis
the Miss
held,
Lucases and the
and
Miss Bennets
perspective
should meet
it is
to talk
best
over the ball.
painter's
To talk
art.
over a ball was absolutely
For
necessary.
through the
And the
painter
morning after the
must
assembly
you
brought
see
the former
his
to
skill,
Longbourn
to
hear.
find where your true image pictured lies,
You
which in my
began the
bosom
evening
shop
well, Charlotte,
is
said Mrs.
hanging
Bennet with
still,
civil self-command.
that hath his windows glazed
You were Mr.
with thine
Bennet's
eyes.
choice.
Now see
Yes,
what good
but
turns
he seemed to like
eyes
the
for
second
eyes have done.
Oh, you mean Jane?
Mine
I suppose, because you
eyes
danced
have
with
drawn
her.
thy shape,
To be sure,
and
that
thine
did
for
seem
me
as if
are
you
windows to
Indeed,
my
I rather
breast,
did.
where through the sun delights
But
to
I
peep,
know what.
to gaze
What
therein
Mr.
on
Robinson?
thee.
Perhaps you mean what I
Yes,
overheard between him and
eyes
Mr. Robinson.
this cunning
Did not
want to
mention it.
grace their
Mr.
art.
Robinson's asking him how
They
he
draw
liked our
what they
American
see.
assemblies, and whether he,
No,
and
not
whether
the
he did not
heart.
think there were a great many pretty women in the room, and which he thought the
Sonnet
prettiest.
25.
And his answering immediately to the last question, "Oh, whose
very
elders,
dead,
Miss Bennet,
if it was
beyond
right.
a doubt. There cannot be two opinions on that point."
If he hasn't been butchered yet.
On my
Let those
word,
who
well,
are in
that is
favour
very
with their
decided indeed. That does
stars
seem
of
as
public
if-
honour and proud
But,
titles
oh,
boast,
May all come
whilst
to nothing, you
I,
know.
whom fortune of such
My
triumph
overhearings
bars,
were more to the purpose than yours,
for
Eliza.
joy in that
said
I
Charlotte.
honour
Mr.
most.
Darcy is not so well worth
Great
listening to as
princes'
his friend.
favourites
is he?
their fair leaves spread,
To be only
but as
just
the
tolerable.
marigold the sun's eye,
I beg you would
and
not
in
mind him,
themselves
Lizzie said,
their
to be vexed by
pride
his
lies
ill-treatment,
buried.
for he is such a disagreeable man that it would be quite a
They in their
misfortune to
glory
find him.
die.
Mrs. Log told me last night
Painful
that he sat
word,
close to her for half
famous
an hour
for
without
words,
once opening his
after a
lips.
thousand victories,
quite sure of
once foiled,
Is
is
not there a
from the
little
book
mistake?
of honour
Said
raise
Jane.
it
I
quite.
certainly saw Mr. Darcy speaking to
Then
him.
happy I.
I, because she asked him at last how he liked Netherfield, and he could not help answering her. But she said he seemed quite angry at being spoken.
Removed.
Miss Bingley told me, said Jane, that he never speaks much unless among his intimate acquaintances.
So,
With them he is
Sonnet
remarkably agreeable.
26.
I would not believe a word of it, my dear.
Lord
If he
of
had been
my
so very
love,
agreeable, he
to
would have
whom
talked to
in
Mrs. Long.
vassalage
But I can guess how it was. Everybody says that he is et up with pride, and I dare say he had heard somehow that Mrs. Long does not
witness
carriage,
duty,
and had come to the ball in a hack chaise.
Duty so great, which wit so
I do not
poor
mind
as
his not
mine
talking to
may
Mrs. Long,
make
said Miss
seem
Lucas,
bare in
but I
wanted
wish he'd
words
danced
to
with
show it,
Eliza.
but that I hope
Another
some
time,
good
Lizzie,
conceit
said her
of
mother.
thine,
I would
thy
not
soul's
dance with him
all
if
nature
I were you.
will bestow it.
I believe
To
not.
whatsoever star that guides my moving
I may
points
safely
on me
promise you
graciously with fair aspect, and puts a
His
power
pride,
on
said
my
Miss Lucas,
active
does not offend
loving
me,
to show me worthy of thy sweet
because
respect.
there is an excuse for it.
Then,
One cannot wonder that so very fine a young man with family, fortune, everything in his favor should think so highly of himself. If I may so express it, he has a right to be proud.
not show my
That is very true, replied Elizabeth. And I could easily forgive him his pride if he had not
next
mortified
two
mine.
sonnets, 27 and 28.
Pride,
are actually
observed Mary,
connected.
who piqued herself upon the solidity of her reflections, is a very common failing, I believe. By all that I have ever read, I am convinced that it is very common indeed, that human nature is particularly prone to it, and that there are very few of us who do not cherish a feeling of self-complacency on the score of some quality or other, real or imaginary. Vanity and pride are different things,
Work my mind,
though the words are
body's
often
works
used
expire.
synonymously. A
Then
person may
my
be
thoughts,
proud
from
without
far
being
where I
vain.
abide,
Pride relates
intend
more
a
to
zealous
an opinion
pilgrimage
of
to thee.
ourselves, vanity to what we would have others think of.
Looking on darkness, which
If I were as
the
rich as
mind
Mr.
would
Darcy, cried a young Lucas who came with his
saveth my
sister,
soul.
I should not care how proud I was. I would keep a pack of
Presents
foxhounds and drink a bottle of wine a day.
Which like
Which is a great deal more than you ought, said Mrs. Bennet, and if I were to see you at it, I should take away your bottle directly. The boy protested that she should not. She continued to declare that she would, and the argument ended.
For thee and for myself.
Chapter 6.
No quiet, fine.
The ladies of Longbourn soon waited on those of Netherfield. The visit was soon returned in due form. Miss Bennet's pleasing manners grew on the goodwill of Mrs. Hurst and Miss Bingley, and though the mother was found to be intolerable and the younger sisters not worth speaking to, a wish of being better acquainted with them was expressed towards the two elders.
Day by night,
By
and
Jane,
night by
this
day
attention was
oppressed.
received with the greatest pleasure, but
And
Elizabeth still saw
enemies to
superciliousness
either's
in their
reign,
treatment of
do
everybody,
in consent
hardly excepting
shake
even her
hands
sister,
to talk
and could
to
not
you.
like them. Though
One
their
by
kindness
toil,
to Jane, such as it
the
was,
other to
had a
complain
value as
how
arising in all
far I
probability
toil,
from the
still
influence
farther
of
off
their brother's
from thee.
affection.
I
Admiration,
tell the
brother's
day
admiration.
to please it.
It was generally
I tell
evident
the
whenever
day
they
to
met
please him
that
thou
he
art
did admire
right,
her, and to
dost
her it was equally
embrace
evident
when
that Jane was
clouds
yielding
do
to the
block
preference
their
which she had begun to entertain for him from the first,
swart
and was in a way
complexion,
to be very
and
much
sparkling stars twine
But she
not.
considered with pleasure that it was not directly to be discovered by the world in general, since Jane united with great
Daily
strength of
draw
feeling,
my soul
a composure of temper, and of uniform cheerfulness of manner which would guard her from the secret suspicions of the impertinent. She mentioned this to her friend Miss Lucas. It may perhaps be pleasant, replied Charlotte.
I was
to be
eating
able
because
to
I was stressed
impose on
out,
public
candy
in
bars
such a
and
case,
chips
but
and
it is
donuts,
sometimes
gaining
a
weight. But since I started,
so very guarded. If a woman conceals her affection with the same skill from the object of it, she may lose the opportunity of fixing him, and it would then be but poor consolation to believe the world equally in the dark. There is so much of gratitude or vanity in almost every attachment that it is not safe to leave any to itself. We can all begin freely, a slight preference is natural enough, but there are very few of us who have heart enough to really be in
I all alone beweep my
In 9
outcast
cases
state,
out of 10,
and troubled
a
deaf
woman had been
heaven
to show
with
more
my
affection than
bootless
she did.
cries, and look
Bingley
upon
liked her
myself
sister
and
undoubtedly,
curse my fate,
but he may
wishing
never do
me
more
like
than
to
like
one
her,
more
if she does not
rich
help
in
him.
hope, featured
Help
like
him.
him, like him with
But
friends
she does help him
possessed,
on, as much as her nature will
desiring
allow.
this man's art,
If I can
and
perceive
that
her
man's
regard for him, he
scope,
must be a
with what I
simple
most
man.
enjoy, contented least.
Remember, Eliza, that he does not know Jane's
Yet,
disposition, as you do.
in these thoughts,
But if a woman is
myself
partial to a
almost
man and does not endeavor to
despising,
conceal it, he must find it out.
I think,
Perhaps he must, if he sees
and
enough of her.
then my
But though
state,
Bingley and Jane meet tolerably
like
often, it is
to the
never for
lark,
many hours
break
together,
of day,
and as they always
rising
see each
from
other in
sullen
large mixed parties, it is impossible that every moment should be employed in conversing together. Jane should therefore make the most of every half hour in which she can command his attention. When she is secure of him, there will be more leisure for falling in love as much as she chooses. Your plan is a good one, replied Elizabeth, where nothing is in question but the desire of being well married. But if I were determined to get a rich husband, or any husband,
I scorn to change my state.
your plan is a good one, replied Elizabeth, where nothing is in question but the desire. I will get this right.
When I look
Your
at my
plan
sonnets,
is a good one, replied Elizabeth, where nothing is in question but the desire of being well married. And if I were determined to get a rich husband, or any husband, I dare say I should adopt it.
Which hopefully
But these are not Jane's feelings. She is not acting by desire. As yet, she cannot even be certain of the
when
degree of her
in
own
disgrace with fortune and men's
nor of its
eyes,
reasonabness.
I all alone
She has known him only a fortnight.
state.
She danced four
And
dances with
deaf
him
heaven
married.
with my
She saw him one
bootless
morning in
cries
his
and
own
look
house,
upon
and has
myself
since
and
dined with
curse
him in
my
company
fate,
4 times.
wishing
This is
me
not
like
quite enough to
one
make her understand
more
his character.
rich in hope, featured
Not as
like
you
him,
represented.
like him.
Had she merely
with
dined
friends
with him, she
possessed,
might only have discovered whether he had a
desiring
good appetite.
this man's
But you must
art
remember that
and
4
that
evenings
man's
have also
scope,
been spent together,
what I
and 4
most
evenings
enjoy,
may do a great deal.
contented least.
Yes. Those 4
Yet,
evenings have enabled them to
in
ascertain
these
that they both
thoughts,
like manner
myself
better than commerce.
almost despising.
But with respect to any other leading characteristic, I
think
do not
of you.
imagine that much has been
And then my
unfolded.
state, like
Well,
to the lark at break
I wish
of
Jane
day
was
arising from sullen
And if she
earth,
were married to him tomorrow,
sings
I should think
hymns
she
of
had as
heaven's
good a
praise.
chance of happiness as if she were to be
Abide,
studying his character
sweet
for a
love
12
remembered,
Happiness
such
in
wealth
marriage is
brings
entirely a matter of chance.
that then
If the dispositions
I scorn to
If the
change
dispositions
my
of the
state.
parties were ever so well known to each other, or ever so similar beforehand,
Thanks for your
it does not
patience.
advance their felicity
And
in the least.
I'll now have a go at
They always
30.
continue to grow sufficiently
Which I
unlike
didn't know before, but
afterwards
I've
to have
grown
their share of
fond of.
vexation. And it is better to know as little as possible of the defects
Sonnet
of the
30.
person with whom you are.
When to the
With whom you are to
sessions of
pass your life.
silent thought, I summon up remembrance of things
But it is
past.
not sound. You know
I
it is not
sigh
sound,
the
and that you
lack
would never
of
act
many
in
a
this way
thing I
yourself.
sought, and with old woes,
Occupied in observing
new
Mr. Bingley's
wail my
attentions to
dear
her sister,
time
Elizabeth was
waste.
far from suspecting
Then
that she
shall
herself
I
was
drown
becoming
an
an object
eye
of some interest in the
unused
eyes of his
flow
friend.
for precious friends.
Mr. Darcy
hid
had
in
at
death's
first scarcely
dateless
allowed her
night.
to be pretty. He had looked at her without admiration at
Love's
the ball.
long since
And when they next
cancelled
met, he looked at
and
her only to
blown the
criticize.
expense of
But
many
no
a
sooner had he made it
vanished
clear
sight.
to himself and his friends that she
Then
hardly
could I
had a good
breathe.
feature in her face, then he began to find it was rendered uncommonly intelligent by the beautiful expression of her dark eyes.
Then can I grieve
this
that
discovery
grievous is
succeeded
foregone,
some others,
and heavily from
equally
woe
mortifying.
to woe tell
Though he
all
had
the
detected
sad
with a critical eye
account
more
of
than one
fore
failure of
bemoaned
perfect
moan,
symmetry in her
which I
form,
knew
he was forced to
as if
acknowledge
not
her
paid
figure to be
before.
light and pleasing, and in spite of
If
his
the one
asserting that her manners were not those
Dear
of the fashionable world, he was
all
called by their
losses
easy
understood.
Of this she was perfectly unaware. To her, he was only a man who had made himself...
During menopause, estrogen drops and cortisol rises, causing unwanted tummy fat. And running an hour a day or cutting calories.
He began to wish to know more of her.
Hi.
And as a
This
step
is
towards
sonnet
conversing with her
31,
himself,
and it's
attended to her
complex.
conversation with
And I
others.
fear that
His
in
doing so
reading it,
drew
I
her
might be
notice. It was at Sir William
overemphasizing
Lucas's,
words
where a
in
large
order to
party
try
was
to make
were
the
assembled.
meaning clear.
What does Mr. Darcy mean, said she to Charlotte, by listening to my conversation
Thy
with Colonel
bosom
Forster?
is endeared with all
That's a question
hearts
which
which
Mr.
I, by
Darcy
lacking,
can answer.
have supposed dead.
But if he
And
does it
there
anymore, I shall
reigns
certainly
love,
let him know
and
that I
all
see what he is
love's
about.
loving parts,
He has a
and
very
all those
satirical
friends
eye.
which I thought
And if I do
buried.
not begin by being impertinent myself,
How
I shall
many
soon
a
grow
holy
angry.
and obsequious tear
On his approaching
hath dear
scene afterwards,
religious
though,
love
without
stolen
seeming to have
from
any
mine
intention
eye.
of speaking,
As
Miss Lucas
interest of the
defied her
dead,
friend
which
to
now
mention such
appear
a
but
subject to him,
things
which immediately
removed,
provoked,
but hidden in thee lie.
provoking Elizabeth to do it,
Thou
she
art
turned
the
to him and
grave
said,
where buried love
"Did you not
doth
think,
live,
Mr. Darcy, that I
hung
expressed
with the
myself
trophies
uncommonly
of
well
my
just now
love
when I
is
was
gone,
teasing Colonel Forster
with
to give us a
all,
ball at
with
Merritt?"
all their parts in me to thee
With great
did
energy,
give,
but
that
it
you
is always a
of many
subject which makes a
now
lady
is
energetic.
thine alone.
You are severe on
Their images I love in view of thee, and thou, all they, hast all
no,
the
I guess it
all
is not a
of me.
non sequitur. With great energy, but it is always a subject which makes a lady energetic. You are severe on us. It will be her turn soon to be
Sonnet
teased, said Miss
32.
Lucas. I am going to open the instrument, Eliza.
If thou survive my
follows?
well-contented day,
You are
when
a
that
very
child
strange
death
creature by way
my
of a
bones
friend.
with
Always
dust
wanted me
shall
to play and
cover,
sing before
and
anyone
shalt
and everybody.
by fortune
If
once
my vanity
more
had taken a
resurvey
musical
these
turn, you would have been
poor,
invaluable.
rude
But as
lines
it is,
of
I
thy
would really
facetious
rather not sit
lover,
down before those who
compare
must be in the
them
habit of
with
hearing
the
the very best
bettering of the
performers.
time.
On
And
Miss
though
Lucas's
they be
persevering,
outstripped
however,
by
she
every
added,
pen,
"Very well,
reserve
if it
them
must be
for my love, not
gravely
a rhyme,
and gravely glancing at Mr.
exceeded
Darcy.
by the height of
There is a
happier
fine
men.
old saying, which everybody here is
Oh,
of course
then,
familiar with.
vouchsafe me but this
Keep your
loving
breath to
thought.
cool your porridge,
Had
and
my
I shall
friend's
keep mine to
muse
swell my
grown
soul."
with this growing age,
Her
a
performance was
dearer
pleasing, though
birth
by
than
no
this
means
his
catchy.
love had brought, to march
After a
in
song or
ranks
two,
of
and before
better
she could reply to the
equipage.
entreaties of several that she would sing
But
again,
since he
she was
died,
eagerly succeeded
and
at the instrument by
poets
her sister
better
Mary,
proved
who,
theirs for their
having,
style,
in consequence of
I'll
being the only
read
plain one in the
his
family, worked hard for
his
knowledge and
love.
accomplishments, was always impatient for display. Mary had neither genius nor taste. And though
Sonnet
vanity had given her
33,
application,
and one of
it
our
had given her
editors
likewise
has made
a
a note
pedantic
here,
air and
which
conceited
says
manner,
this is
which
the
would have
first
injured a
of
higher
a
degree of
series of
excellence
3
than
poems
she
in which the beloved
Elizabeth,
is
easy and
pictured as
unaffected,
having
had been
heard
listened
the
to with
poet
much more pleasure,
through
though
some
not playing
unspecified mystery.
And Mary, at the end of a long concerto, was glad to purchase praise and
Full many a
gratitude by
glorious
Scotch and
morning
Irish
have I
airs
seen
at the request of her
flatter
younger
the
sisters, who with some of the
mountaintops with
Lucases
sovereign
and 2 or
eye,
3 officers
kissing with golden
joined eagerly
face the
in
meadows
dancing at one end of the room.
gilding pale streams with heavenly alchemy.
Mr. Darcy stood near them in
Anon,
silent indignation
permit the
at such a mode of
basest
passing the evening,
clouds to rise
to the exclusion
with
of all
ugly
conversation,
rack on his celestial
and was
face,
too much engrossed by
and
his
from the
thoughts to
forlorn
perceive that Sir
world
William
his
Lucas
visage
was his
hide,
neighbour, till
stealing
Sir William thus
unseen
began.
to west with this
What a
disgrace.
charming amusement for young people this
Even
is,
so,
Mr. Darcy. There's
my
nothing
son,
like
one
dancing
early
after all.
morn
I
did
consider it
shine
as one of the
with
first
all
refinements of
triumphant
polished
splendor on
society.
my brow, but
Certainly, sir.
out
And
alack
it has the
he
advantage
was
also
but
of being in
one
vogue among the
hour
less
mine.
polished societies of the world.
The
Every
region
savage
cloud
can dance.
that masked in
Sir William
from
only
me
smiled.
now.
Your friend performs delightfully,
Yet
continued
him,
after a pause
for
on
this
seeing
my
Vivian
love no
join the group.
wit
And I doubt
disdaineth.
not that you are an adept
Sons
in the
of the
science yourself,
world
Mr.
may
Darcy.
stain,
You saw
when
me dance
heaven's
at Meryton, I believe,
sun
sir.
staineth.
Yes, indeed, and received no inconsiderable pleasure from the sight. You often dance in solitude. Do you not think it would be a proper compliment to the place?
Sonnet 34.
It is a compliment which I never pay to. It is a
Why
compliment
didst thou
which I
promise
never
such
pay
a
to any
beauteous
place
day,
but I can avoid
and
it.
make me travel forth
You
without
have
my
a house
cloak,
in town, I conclude?
to let base clouds o'ertake me in
I
the
had
way,
once had some
hiding
to fix
thy
it down
bravery
myself,
in their
for I am
rotten smoke.
fond of superior society.
'Tis not enough.
But I did not
that
feel quite
through the
certain about the
cloud
air
thou
of
break
London. I did not
to
feel quite
dry
certain
the
that the air
rain
of
on
London
my
would agree with Lady
storm-beaten
Lucas.
face.
He paused in hopes
No
of an
man
answer,
well of such
but
a
his
sound
companion was not
can
disposed to
speak.
make any. And
that
Elizabeth,
heals
at
the
that
wound
instant moving
and
towards
cures
them, he
not
was
the
struck with the action of
disgrace.
doing a very gallant thing,
Nor
and
can
called
thy
out to her,
shame
"My dear
give
Miss
physic
Eliza, why
to
are you
my
not
grief.
dancing?
Though
Mr.
thou
Darcy, you
repent,
must allow me
yet
to
I
present
have
this young
still
lady
the
to you
loss.
as a very desirable partner.
The
You
offender's
cannot
sorrow
refuse to dance, I am
lends
sure,
but
when so much
weak
beauty is
relief
before
to
you."
him that bears
taking her
the
hand,
strong offence's
he would have
cross.
given it to Mr. Darcy, who, though extremely surprised,
Those
was not
tears
unwilling to receive
are
it.
pearl
When she instantly drew back, and said with some discomposure to Sir William, "Indeed, sir, I have not the least intention of dancing. I entreat you not to suppose that I moved this way in order to beg for a partner." Mr. Darcy, with grave propriety, requested to be allowed the honour of her
Sonnet
hand, but in
35.
vain. Elizabeth was determined, nor did Sir William at all shake her
Sonnet
purpose by his
35.
attempt at persuasion. "You excel so much in the dance, Miss Eliza,
No
that it
more
is cruel
do
to
we
deny me the happiness
that
of
which
seeing
thou
you.
hast done.
And though this gentleman dislikes the
Roses
amusement in
have
general,
thorns,
he can have no objection,
and so
I am
have
sure, to
fountains
oblige us for one half hour."
Clouds and eclipses stain both moon
Mr.
and
Darcy
sun,
is all politeness.
and loathsome
But
canker
Elizabeth smiled.
lives in sweet.
He is, indeed, but considering the inducement, my
All
dear
men
Miss
make
Eliza, we
frocks,
cannot wonder at his
and even
complacence.
I,
For who would
this,
object to such a part?
authorizing thy trespass,
Elizabeth
with
looked
compare,
archly
myself
and turned away.
corrupting,
Her resistance
salving
had
thy
not
amiss,
injured her with the
excusing thy sins
and he was thinking
more
of her with
than
some
thy sins
complacency
are.
when thus accosted
For
by
to
Miss
thy
Bingley.
sensual fault
I
I
can
bring
guess the subject of
incense,
your reverie.
the adverse party is
I should
thy
imagine
advocate.
not.
And against
You are
myself,
considering how
lawful
insupportable it would be
plea
to pass
commences.
many evenings in this manner, in such society.
Such civil
And
war
indeed, I am quite of your
is
opinion.
in my
I
love
have never
and
more
hate,
glory.
that I am
The
an accessory,
insipidity,
needs
and
must
yet the
be
noise,
to
the
that
nothingness,
sweet
and yet the
fruit
self-importance of all
which
those
sorrow
things.
is
What
wrought.
would I give to hear your strictures on them?
Complex, difficult.
Your conjecture is totally wrong.
Thank you very much.
For you. My mind was more agreeably engaged.
Sonnet
I have been meditating on the very
36.
great pleasure which a pair of fine eyes in the face of a pretty woman
Let me
seems to
confess
bestow.
that we too must
Miss Bingley
betway,
immediately fixed her eyes on Miss
although
Grace,
our
and
undivided
desired he would tell her
loves are
what lady
one.
had the credit of inspiring
So
such
shall those
affections.
blots that do with me
Mr. Darcy
remain
replied with great
without thy
intrepidity.
help, by me before
Miss Elizabeth
the
Bennet.
Lord.
Miss
In our
Elizabeth
two
Bennet,
loves there is but
replied
one
Miss Bingley.
mistake.
I am
Though in
all
our
astonishment.
lives a separable spite.
How long has she
which,
been such a favourite?
Though it alter not
And
love's
pray,
sole effect, yet
when am
doth
I to
it
wish you
steal
joy?
sweet hours from love's
That is
delight.
exactly the question which I expected you to ask.
I may not
A lady's imagination is
evermore
very
acknowledge
rapid. It
thee,
jumps from
lest
admiration to
my
love, from love to
bewailed
matrimony in a
guilt should do
moment.
that, should
I
do
knew you
thee
would be wishing me
shame.
joy.
Nor thou,
Nay, if
with
you are
public
serious about it, I
kindness
shall
honour
consider
thee,
the matter as absolutely
unless
settled.
thou
You will
take
be having
that
a
honour
charming
from my
mother-in-law,
name.
indeed. And of course,
Do not
she will always be at Pemberley.
I love thee in such
He
sort
listened to her with perfect
as thou
indifference
being
while
mine.
she chose to entertain
Mine
herself in this manner.
is thy good report.
And as his composure convinced her that all was safe,
Hi,
the wit flowed along.
happy St. George's Day. And it's
You
appropriate
guys have a great day.
that this is also Shakespeare's birthday, we believe. So, Sonnet 37. As a decrepit father takes delight to see his active child do
Chapter
deeds
7.
of youth, so
Mr. Bennet's
I,
property
made
consisted almost
lame by
entirely of
fortune's
the estate of
dearest
3,000
spite,
a year,
take all
which,
my comforts
unfortunately for his
of
daughters,
thy
was entailed
worth
in
and
default
truth.
of heirs male.
For whether
on a
beauty,
distant relation.
birth,
And
or
their mother's
wealth, or
fortune,
wit, or
though
any of
ample
these,
for
all,
situation and life,
or
could
all,
but ill
or more,
supply
entitled in thy parts, do
Her
crown
father had
it
been an
sit.
attorney in
I
London and
make
had
my
left them
love
£1,000.
engrafted
She had
to
a
the
sister married to
store.
a Mr. Phillips, who had been a clerk.
So then I am not lame,
to their father,
poor,
and succeeded him in the
nor
business.
despised,
And a brother settled
whilst
in
that
London
this
in a
shadow
respectable
doth
line of
such
trade.
substance give,
The village
as
of
I,
Longbourn was only
in
1
thy
mile from
abundance,
Meryton, a
can
most convenient
suffice,
distance for the young
by a
ladies,
part of
who
all
were usually tempted
thy
thither
glory
3 or 4 times a week to pay their duty
Look,
to their aunt and to
what
the
is
milliner's shop
best,
just over the way.
that best
The 2 youngest
I
of the
wish for
family,
thee.
Catherine and Lydia, were
This
particularly
wish
frequent
I
in these
have,
attentions. Their minds were
then
more
10
vacant than their
times
sisters,
happy
and when nothing
me.
better offered, a walk to Meryton was
Stand
necessary
by,
to
there
amuse
will
their
be
morning
a
hours
little
and
surprise
furnish conversation
to
for the
follow
evening.
shortly.
And however bare of news the country in general might be, they always contrived to learn something from their
Because
aunt.
it is
At present, indeed, they were well supplied both with news and happiness by the recent arrival of the militia regiment.
with
It was to remain the
something
whole
a little
winter,
more
and
expansive
Meryton
than a
was
sonnet.
the headquarters.
Not
Their
a
visits to
scene,
Mrs. Phillips
not
were now productive of the
but
most
wonderful
interesting
speeches.
intelligence. Every day added something to their knowledge of the officers'
Introducing
names and connections.
what is to come.
Their lodgings
Yes.
were not long a secret, and at length they began to know the officers themselves. Mr. Phillips visited them all,
Entertain
and this opened
conjecture
to his
of a
nieces a
time
store
when
of felicity.
creeping murmur and the pouring
They could talk
dark
of nothing
fills the wide
And
vessel
Mr.
of the
Bingley's
universe.
large fortune, the mention of which
Camp
gave
to
animation
camp,
to their mother,
through the
was
foul
worthless in their
womb of
eyes when
night,
opposed to the
the hum
regimentals
of either
of an
army
ensign.
stilly sounds.
After
The
listening one
fixed
morning to their
sentinels
effusions on the
almost
subject, Mr.
receive
Bennet
the
coolly
secret
observed,
whispers of each other's
"From all that I can collect by your
Fire
manner of
answers
talking,
fire.
you must be the
And through
you must be
their
two
palely
of the silliest
flames,
girls in the country.
Each battle
I have
sees the
suspected it some
other's
time,
umbered face.
but I am now convinced."
Steed threatens steed
Catherine
in
was
high
disconcerted and
boastful
made no
neighs,
answer, but
piercing
Lydia,
the knight's
with
dull
perfect
ear.
indifference,
And
continued
from
to
the
express
tents,
her admiration
the
of Captain
armourers,
Carter and her
accomplishing
hope
the knights
of
with
seeing
busy
him in the
hammers
course of the
closing
day,
rivets up,
as he was
give
going the
dreadful
next morning
note
to
of
London.
preparation.
"I am astonished, my dear," said Mrs. Bennet, "that you should be so ready to think of your own children silly.
Drowsy morning
If I wished to think slightingly of anybody's
proud of
children,
their
it should not
numbers
be of my
and
own.
secure
however.
in soul, the
If my
confident
children are
and
silly, I would hope to
over-lusty
be always
French
sensible of it.
do the low-rated
Yes,
English play
but as
at
it
dice
happens, they are
and
all very
chide the
clever.
crippled, tardy-gated knight who,
That is the only
like a
point
foul
I
and
flatter
ugly
myself on
witch,
which we
doth
do
limp
not
so
agree. I had
tediously
hoped
away.
that our sentiments coincided in every particular,
poor
but I must so far differ from
condemned
you
English,
as differ from you as to
by
think
their
our
watchful
two youngest
fires,
daughters
sit
uncommonly
patiently
foolish.
and inly
Dear Mr.
ruminate
Bennet,
the morning's
you must not expect
danger.
such girls to have the sense of
And
their
their
father and
gesture
mother.
sad,
When they get to our age, I dare say they will
lean
not think about
cheeks and
officers any more than we do.
war-worn coats
I remember
presenteth
the time
them unto
when
the
I liked to
gazing
red
moon
coat
so
myself
many
very well.
horrid
And
ghosts.
indeed, so I do still at my heart. And if a smart young
Who
colonel
will
with 5,000 or
behold
6,000 a year should
the
want one of
royal
my girls, I
captain
should not
of
say
this
nay to him.
ruined
And I
band,
thought Colonel Forster looked very
walking
becoming
from
the other night at Sir
watch
William's in his
to watch,
regiment.
from tent to tent. Let
Mamma!
him cry
cried Lydia.
praise
My
and
aunt says that
glory on
Colonel
his
Forster
head
and Captain Carter
before
do
he
not go
goes
so
and
often to
visits
Miss
all his
Watson's
hosts,
as
bids
they
them
did when they first
good morrow,
came. She sees
with
them
a
now very often standing
modest
in
smile
Clark's
and calls
library.
them
Mrs. Bennet was
brothers,
prevented replying by the entrance of the footman with a
friends,
note for Miss
and
Bennet.
countrymen.
It came from Netherfield, and the servant waited for an answer. Mrs. Bennet's eyes sparkled with pleasure, and she was eagerly calling out while her daughter read. "Well, Jane, who is it from? What is it about? What does he say? Will Jane make haste and tell us? Make haste,
Upon
my
his royal
love."
face, there is no
It is
note
from Miss
how
Bingley,
dread an
said
army
Jane, and
hath
then read it
surrounded
aloud.
him, nor does he
My dear
dedicate
friend,
one jot
if
of
you are
colour
not so
to the
compassionate
weary
as to
and
dine
all
today
watched
with Louisa
night,
and me,
but freshly
we shall
looks
be in
and
danger of hating each other for the
overbears
rest of our
attaint with
lives,
cheerful
for a whole day's
semblance
tete-a-tete
and
between two
sweet
women can
majesty,
never end without a
that
quarrel.
every wretch,
Come as soon as you
pining
can
and
on
pale
receipt of
before,
this. My brother and the
beholding
gentleman
him,
are to dine with the officers.
plucks
Yours ever, Caroline
comfort
Bingley.
from his
With
lips.
the officers? Cried
A
Lydia.
large,
I wonder my aunt did not tell us of
like
that.
the sun, his liberal-eyed gift to everyone, thawing cold fear, that mean and gentle all behold, as may unworthiness
because it
define.
seems likely to rain, and then you
A
can stay
little
there all night.
touch of Harry.
That would be a good scheme, said Elizabeth, if you were sure that they would not offer to send her home.
And so,
Oh,
our
but the
sea
gentleman will have Mr.
must
Bingley's
to the battle
chaise to
fly,
go to Meryton,
where-
and the Hursts have
Oh,
no
for
horses
pity,
to
we shall
ride.
much disgrace
I'd
with
much rather go in the
405 most vile
dear,
and
your father
ragged
cannot spare the
foils,
horses,
right ill
I'm
disposed
sure.
in
They are wanted in the farm, Mr.
ridiculous,
Bennet, are they not?
The name of
They are wanted in the farm much oftener than I can get them.
yet sit
But if you
and see
have got them today, said Elizabeth,
Minding
my mother's
true
purpose will be answered.
by what their mockery.
She did at last extort from her father an acknowledgement that the horses were engaged.
Sorry about the
Jane was
dry in the
therefore
middle.
obliged to go on horseback,
Lot of words.
and her mother attended her to
Thank
the
you for
door with
listening.
many cheerful prognostics of a bad day. Her hopes were answered.
evening.
Jane had not gone
It's a
had
little
not been
late.
gone
I
long
apologize.
before it rained
Too much
hard.
relaxation.
Her sisters were uneasy
Not
for
enough
her, and her
preparation.
mother
But here we go.
was delighted.
Sonnet
The rain
38.
continued the whole evening without interruption.
How can
Jane
my muse
certainly would
want
not.
subject to invent, while thou
This
dost
was a
breathe
lucky
that pours
idea
into
of
my
mine
verse
indeed,
thine
said
own
Mrs. Bennet
sweet
more than once,
argument,
as if the
too
credit of
excellent
making it
for
rain
every
were all her
vulgar
own.
paper to
Till the
realize.
next morning, however, she was not aware
Oh,
of all
give
the
thyself
felicity
the
of her
thanks of
contrivance.
aught in me,
Breakfast was
worthy
scarcely over when a
perusal
servant from
stand
Netherfield
against thy
brought the
sight.
following note for
For who
Elizabeth.
so dumb
My
that
dearest
cannot
Lizzie,
write
I
to
find
thee,
myself very
when thou
unwell this
thyself
morning, which I
dost
suppose
give
is to be
invention
imputed by my getting
light.
wet through yesterday.
Be thou
My kind friends will not hear of my returning till I am better.
10 times
They insist
more in
also
worth
on my
than
seeing
those
Mr.
old
Jones.
nine which
Therefore, do
rhymers
not be alarmed
invocate,
if you should hear of his
and he
having been
that
to
calls on thee.
and accepting a
Let
sore
him
throat and a
bring
headache.
forth
There is not
eternal numbers to
Yours
outlive long date. If my
Well, my
slight
dear, said
muse
Mr. Bennet, when
do
Elizabeth
please
had read the
these
note.
curious days, the
If your
pain
daughter
be
should have a
mine,
dangerous fit of illness,
mine
if
shall
she
be
should
the
die, it would be a comfort to know that it was all in pursuit of Mr. Bingley and under your orders.
Hi.
I'm not afraid
Sunday
of her
sonnet.
dying.
39.
People do not die of little trifling colds. She will be taken good care
Oh,
of.
how thy
As long as she
worth with
stays there,
manners
it is
may I
all very
sing,
well.
when thou art
I would
all
go and
the
see her
better
if I
part
could
of
have a
me.
carriage.
What can
Elizabeth,
mine own
feeling
praise
rather
to mine
anxious,
own
determined
self
to go to her,
bring?
though the carriage was not to
And
be
what
had.
is but mine
And
own,
as she was
and I
no
praise
horsewoman,
thee?
walking was
Even
her
for this,
alternative.
let us divide
She
it,
declared her resolution.
and our dear love lose
So
name
silly,
of single
cried her
one,
mother. Just
that
to
by
think of
this
such-
separation I may give
I
that
don't know what it
due
looked like
to
to you, it
thee,
just told me I had
which
no
thou
worries.
deservest alone.
Um,
Oh, absence!
as to think of such
What
a
a
thing,
torment
in all this
wouldst thou
dirt,
prove,
you
were
will
it
not be
not
fit
thy
to be
sour
seen when you
leisure
get there.
gave sweetly
I shall be very fit
to
to see Jane,
entertain
which is
the
all I
time
want.
with thoughts of love,
Is
which
this a
time
hint to me,
and
Lizzie,
thoughts
said her father,
so
to send for
sweetly
the horses?
doth deceive.
No, indeed. I do not wish to
But thou
avoid the war.
teachest
The distance is nothing when one has a motive. Only 3 miles. I shall be
by
back by
praising
dinner.
him here.
I admire the
hence
activity of
remain.
your benevolence, observed Mary. But every impulse of feeling should be guided by reason, and in my opinion, exertion should always be in proportion to what is required.
Sit down, come on.
We will go as far as Meryton with you, said Catherine and Lydia.
Yes.
Elizabeth
Isn't that
accepted their company, and the 3 young ladies set off together. If we make haste, said Lydia as they walked along, perhaps we may see something of Captain Carter before he goes. In Meryton they parted. The 2 youngest repaired to the lodgings of one of the officers' wives, and Elizabeth continued her walk alone, crossing field after field at a quick pace, jumping over stiles and springing over puddles with impatient activity, and finding herself at last within view of the house, with weary ankles, dirty stockings, and a face glowing with the warmth of exercise. She was shown into the breakfast parlour, where all but Jane were assembled, and where her appearance created a great deal of surprise.
Take all my love,
That she
my
should have
love,
walked
yea,
3
take
miles
them
so
all.
early in the day,
What
in
hast
such
thou then
dirty
more
weather,
than
and
thou
by
hadst
herself,
before?
was almost incredible
No,
to Mrs.
love,
Hurst and Miss Bingley.
my love, that thou
And Elizabeth
mayest
was
true
convinced
love
that they
call.
held her
All mine was thine, before thou
She was
hadst
received,
this
however,
more.
very politely by them,
Then,
and in their brother's
if for
manners
my
there was
love
something better.
thou my love receivest,
There was
I
good humour,
cannot blame thee
kindness.
for my love thou
Mr. Darcy
usest.
said very little, and Mr. Hurst
Yet
nothing at all.
be blamed if
The
thou
former was
thyself
divided
deceivest
between
by
admiration
wilful
of the
taste
brilliance
of
which
what
exercise
thyself
had given to her
refusest.
complexion, and doubt
I do
as
forgive
to the
thy
occasions
robbery,
justifying
gentle
her coming
thief,
so far alone.
although thou
The latter
steal thee
was
all
thinking
my
of his
poverty.
breakfast.
And yet,
Her inquiries
love
after her
knows
sister were not very
it is
favourably
a
answered.
greater
Miss
grief
Bennet
to bear
had slept
love's
ill,
wrong than
and though
hate's
up,
known injury.
was very feverish, and not well enough to leave
Lascivious
her room.
Grace,
Elizabeth
in
was
whom
glad to be
all
taken to
ill
her
well
immediately,
shows,
and
kill
Jane,
me
who
with
had only
spites,
been withheld
yet
by the
we
fear
must
of giving
not
alarm or inconvenience from
foes.
expressing in her note how much she longed for a visit, was
What did you think of
delighted
that?
at her entrance. She was not equal, however, to much conversation, and when Miss Bingley left them together, could attempt little
Song about important things, you know. Things that are going on in the country.
When breakfast was over, they were joined by the sisters, and Elizabeth began to like them herself when she saw how much affection and solicitude they showed for Jane. The apothecary came, and having examined his patient, said, as might be supposed, that she had caught a violent cold, and that they must endeavour to get the better of it. Advised her to return to bed and promised her some draughts. The advice was followed readily, for the feverish symptoms increased, and her head ached acutely. Elizabeth did not quit her room for a
41.
moment, nor were the other ladies often absent.
Those pretty
Gentlemen
wrongs
being
that
out,
liberty
they had,
commits
in
when
fact,
I am sometime absent from thy heart, thy
When the clock
beauty
struck
and thy
3,
years
Elizabeth
full
felt
well
that she must
befits,
go, and
for
very
still
unwillingly said so.
temptation follows
Miss Bingley
where thou
offered her the
art.
carriage, and she only wanted a
Gentle
little pressing to
thou
accept it, when Jane
and
testified
therefore to
such
be one.
concern in parting with her
Beauteous
that Miss
thou
Bingley was
art,
obliged to convert the
therefore
offer
to
of the
be
chaise
assailed.
to an invitation to remain
And when a
in
woman
Netherfield for the present.
wounds, what woman's
Elizabeth
son
most
will
thankfully
sourly
consented,
leave her
and a
till he
servant
hath
was dispatched to
prevailed?
Longbourn to acquaint the family with her
Eileen,
stay. And
But
bring
yet
back
thou
a
mightest,
supply
thou
of
mightest my seat forbear, and chide thy beauty and thy straying youth,
Chapter 8.
who lead thee
At 5
in
o'clock,
thy
the two
riot
ladies
even
retired to
there,
dress,
where
and
thou
at
art
6:30
forced to
Elizabeth
break
was summoned to
a
dinner.
twofold
To the civil inquiries which then
hers
poured in,
by thy
and amongst
beauty
which
tempting
she
her
had
to
measure
thee,
distinguishing with much
thine,
superior solicitude
by
Miss
thy
Bingley,
beauty
she
being
could not make a
false
very
to me.
favourable answer. Jane was by no means better.
Though sad.
The sisters, on hearing this, repeated 3 or 4 times how much they were grieved, how shocking it was to have a bad cold, and how excessively they disliked being ill
Thou
themselves.
hast her.
And then thought no more
It
of the
is
matter,
not all
and their
my
indifference towards Jane, when
And
not
yet,
immediately before them,
It may be
restored
said,
Elizabeth to the
I
enjoyment
loved her
of all her
dearly.
former dislikes.
That she hath thee
Their brother,
is
indeed,
of my
was the only
wailing
one of the
chief.
party whom she could
A
regard
loss
with
in
any
love
complacency.
that touches me more
His anxiety
nearly.
for Jane was evident, and
Loving
his
offenders.
attentions to herself most
Thus
pleasing,
will I
and they
excuse
prevented her feeling herself so much an
Thou
intruder
dost
as she
love her,
believed she
because
was
thou
considered
knowest
by the
I
others.
love her.
She had
And for
very
my
little
sake,
notice from any
even
but
so doth she abuse
Miss Bingley was
me,
engrossed by Mr.
suffering my
Darcy,
friend,
sister,
for my sake,
scarcely less.
to approve her.
And as for Mr. Hurst,
If I lose
was
thee,
sad. He was an indolent
my
man
loss
who lived
is
only
my
to
love
eat, drink,
gain.
and play at cards. Who,
And
when he
losing
found her to
my
prefer
friend
a plain
hath
dish
found that
to a...
loss.
Now, I don't know
Both
this word.
find
Ragout?
each other,
Ragout?
and I lose both.
I know what it is. I know how to spell it. I know how to read it. I don't know how to pronounce it.
This cross.
You know what I mean? A ragout. Had nothing to say to her. When dinner was over, she returned directly to Jane, and Miss Bingley began abusing her as soon as she was out of the room. Her manners were pronounced to be very bad indeed. She didn't know how to say ragout, clearly. A mixture of pride and impertinence. She had no conversation, no style, no beauty. Mrs. Hurst thought the same and added, "She has nothing, but being an excellent walker. I shall never forget her appearance
this is
morning. She
sonnet
really
43.
looked almost
One
right.
of my favorites.
She did indeed, Louisa.
and you're probably all very familiar
nonsensical to come at all.
For those who might
Why
not,
must she
I
be
just
scampering about the
point out
country
one
because
thing,
her sister had a
that
cold?
the word wink
Yeah,
that
so
occurs in the
untidy,
first
so
line
lousy.
doesn't mean
Yes, and her
it
petticoat.
actually
I
means
hope you
sleep.
saw her petticoat, 6 inches deep
Just
in mud,
keep that
I'm
in
absolutely
mind.
certain. And the
Okay,
gown,
sonnet
which had been
43.
let down to hide it, not doing its office.
When most I wink,
Your picture may be
then
very
do mine
exact,
eyes
Louisa, said
best
Bingley.
see.
But this was all lost
All
upon
the
me.
day
I
they
thought
view
Miss Elizabeth
things
Bennet looked
unrespected.
remarkably well when she came into the room
When
this
I
morning.
sleep,
Her dirty petticoat
in
quite
dreams
escaped
they
my
look
notice.
on thee, and
You
darkly
observed it,
bright,
Mr. Darcy,
are
right?
bright in dark
Really,
direction.
and I am inclined to think that you would not wish
Then
to see your
thou,
sister make such an
whose
exhibition.
shadows doth make bright.
To walk 3 miles
How would
or 4
thy
miles.
shadows form happy show to the
walk 3
clear day,
miles or 4
with
miles
thy
or
much
5
clearer
miles or
light,
whatever
when
it
to
is, above
unseeing
her ankles in
eyes
dirt and
thy
alone,
shade
quite alone.
shines
What
so.
could she mean by it? It
How
seems to
would
me to
I
show an
say,
abominable
mine
sort of
eyes
conceited
be blessed
independence, a
made
most
by
country
looking
town
on thee
indifference to
in the
decorum.
living day.
It shows an
When
affection
in
for her
dead
sister
night
that is very
thy
pleasing,
fair,
said Mr. Bingley.
imperfect
I'm
shade
afraid, Mr. Darcy,
through heavy sleep
observed Miss Bingley in a
on
half whisper,
sightless eyes
this
doth stay.
adventure has rather affected your admiration
All days
by now.
are nights to
Not
see
at all, he replied.
till I see thee,
They were brightened by the exercise.
and nights bright
A
days
short pause followed the
when
speech, and Mrs.
dreams
Hurst
do
began
show
again.
thee.
I have an excessive regard for Miss Jane Bennet. She is really a very sweet girl, and I wish with all my heart she were well settled. But with
Well,
such a father
sonnet
and mother and such
time.
low connections, I'm afraid.
I thought that yesterday it
I
would be a
think I have heard
refreshing
you say
change
that their
to
uncle
shift
is an attorney
from the
emeritus.
mob.
Yes, and
to
they
the
have
medieval.
another who lives somewhere
I
near
love those videos
Cheapside.
of sonnets.
That
So
is
here we are,
capital,
sonnets
added her sister, and they
44.
both laughed.
This is about separation.
If they had uncles enough to fill all
If the
Cheapside,
dull
I think,
substance of
it
my
would not
flesh
make them
were
one jot
thought,
less agreeable.
injurious
But it
distance
must very
should not
materially
stop my
lessen
way.
their chance
For
of
then,
marrying men of any
despite of
consideration in the
space,
world.
I would be brought from
Drawn by
limits
Darcy.
far remote where
To this
thou
speech,
dost stay.
Bingley made no answer.
No matter
But his
then,
sisters,
although my foot did stand upon the
and indulged
farthest
their mirth for
earth
some time at the
removed
expense
from
of their
thee,
dear friends.
for
vulgar
nimble
relations.
thought can jump both sea and
With a
land,
renewal of
and
tenderness,
soonest
however,
think
they returned.
the place where he would be.
You're so awful, the sister. With a
Well,
renewal of tenderness, however, they
Thought
returned to her
kills
room
me
on
that
leaving
I
the
am
dining
not
table,
thought to
and sat
leap
with her
large
till
lengths
summoned
of
to coffee
miles
to
when thou art
She
gone.
was still very poorly,
But that
and
so
Elizabeth
much
had
of
not
earth
quitted
and
home
water
till late in the
wrought,
evening.
I must
She had the
attend
comfort of seeing
time's
her
leisure with my mole,
And when it seemed to her rather right
receiving
and
naught,
pleasant that she should
but
go
elements
downstairs
so
herself.
slow,
On entering the
that
drawing
heavy
room, she
tears,
found the whole party at loo,
badges of
and was
either
immediately
wood.
invited to join them. But suspecting them to be playing high, she declined it, and making her sister the excuse,
Don't book a cheap hotel.
said she would amuse herself for the short time she could stay below with a book. Mr. Hurst looked at her with astonishment.
As I said yesterday,
Do
this
you
is
prefer reading
two-sonnet
cards?
theme.
Said he.
And the first
That is rather
sonnet,
singular.
44, was
Miss
about
Eliza
the
Bennet,
elements.
said Miss Bingley.
And the
She
elements
despises
in this
cards.
one
She is a great
were
reader
earth and water,
has no
which are
pleasure
thought
in
to be the
anything
dullest
else.
elements. In this one,
deserve
the
neither such
elements
praise nor
are
such
air
censure,
and
cried
fire,
Elizabeth.
which have a
I am not a
different
great reader,
impact
and I have
on us
pleasure in many things.
when we're subject to them.
In nursing your sister, I am sure you have pleasure.
Sonnet 45.
And I hope it will be soon increased by seeing her quite well.
The
Elizabeth
other
thanked
two
him from her heart, and then walked towards the table where a few books were lying. He immediately offered to fetch her others,
The other two,
all that his
slight
library
air
afforded.
and purging fire,
And I
are
wish
both
my
with
collection
me
were larger
wherever
for your
I
benefit and my
abide.
own credit, but I am an
The first my thought,
And
the
though I
other
have not many,
my desire.
I have more than I've ever
These
looked
present
into.
absent,
Elizabeth
with
assured
swift
him she
motion
could suit herself
slide.
perfectly with those in the room.
For when these quicker elements are gone
astonished, said
in
Miss
tender
Bingley, that my
embassy
father
of
should have
love
left so
to
small a
thee,
collection of books.
my life,
What a delightful
being
library
made
you
of
have at
four,
Pemberley, Mr.
with
Darcy.
two alone sinks
It
down
ought
to
to be
death,
good,
oppressed
he replied.
with
It has been the
melancholy,
work of many generations.
until life's
And then you have
composition be
added so much to it
cured
yourself.
by
You're
those
always
swift
buying
messages returned
I
from
cannot
thee,
comprehend the neglect of
who
a family
even but
library in
now
such
come
days
back
as
again,
these.
assured of thy
Neglect!
fair
I'm sure you
health,
could neglect
recounting
nothing that
it
can
to
add
me.
to the beauties of that noble place.
This told
Charles,
my joy.
when you build your house,
But
I
then,
wish it may be half
no
as
longer
delightful as
glad,
mine.
I send them
I
back
wish it may.
again. And
But I would
straight
really
grow
advise you to
sad.
make your purchase in that neighbourhood and take Pemberley for a kind
That's
of model. There is not a finer
I might
county
have
in
another go
England
at
than
that
Derbyshire.
tomorrow. But
With
now,
all my heart, I will buy Pemberley itself if
watching.
Darcy will sell it. I am talking of possibilities, Charles. Upon my word, Caroline, I should think it more possible to get Pemberley by purchase than by imitation. Elizabeth was so much caught with what passed as to leave her very little attention from her book, and soon, laying it wholly aside, she drew
So here
near
we
the
have
corridor
sonnet
and stationed
46,
herself
and this
between
again is
Mr.
one of
Bingley
these
and his
double-headed ones.
eldest sister. To
By
observe the game.
double-headed, when I was a kid, I
Is
was a
Miss
train
Darcy
spotter,
much grown
and the double-headed
since
was
the
when there
spring?
were two
Miss
engines.
B?
pulling
Will
each
she
other.
be as tall as I am? I think she will. She is now about Miss Elizabeth Bennet's height.
Mine eye and heart are at a
How I
mortal
long
war.
to see her
How to
again.
divide
I never
the
met with
conquest
anybody who
of thy
delighted me
sight.
so much.
Mine eye, my heart, thy picture sight
So
would
extremely
bar.
accomplished for her
Mine
age.
heart, mine
A
eye,
performance
the
on the
freedom
pianoforte.
of that right. My heart doth plead that thou in him dost lie, a closet
It is
never
exquisitely
pierced with
exquisite.
crystal eyes.
It is amazing
But the
to me,
defendant
how
doth
young
that
ladies
plea
can have
deny,
patience to
and
be-
says in him, thy
It
fair
is
appearance
amazing to me, Secretary,
lies.
how young ladies can have patience
To
to be so
sight
very
is touch,
accomplished
is
as they all are.
impaneled, a quest of thoughts, all tenants to the heart,
young
and
ladies
by their
accomplished,
verdict
my
is
dear
determined
Charles.
the clear eyes' moiety
Yes,
and the
all of
dear
them, I think. They
heart's
all
part,
paint,
and
tables,
thus
cover screens,
mine
and net
eyes
purses.
due
I
is
scarcely
thy
know anyone who
outward
cannot
part.
do all this. And I'm
And
sure
my
I never
heart's
heard of a young
right.
never heard a young lady spoken of for
Thy
the first time
inward
without being informed that she is
love.
very accomplished.
I thought that was
Your
gonna be
list
very
of the
difficult.
common extent of accomplishments, said Darcy, has too much truth. The word is applied to many a woman who deserves it.
Answer this
no
question.
otherwise than
What
by
matters
making a
more
purse
to
or
you
covering a screen.
than money?
But I am very far from agreeing with you in your estimation of ladies
Sonnet
in general. I cannot
47.
boast of knowing more than half a dozen in the whole range of my acquaintance that are really accomplished.
Betwixt my eye and
Nor
heart
I
a
am sure,
league
said
is
Miss
took,
Bingley.
and each doth good
Then,
turns now
observed
unto the
Elizabeth,
other. When that
You
mine
must comprehend
eye
a great deal
is
in your
found
idea of
for
an
look,
accomplished woman.
or hear,
Yes, I do comprehend a great
or
deal.
heart, in love with sighs himself
certainly,
doth
cried
smother,
Miss Bingley, sister.
with mine
No one can
love's
be
picture,
really
then
esteemed
my eye
accomplished
doth feast,
who does not
and to the painted
greatly
banquet
surpass what is
bids
usually
my
met with. A woman must have a thorough knowledge of
Another
music,
time,
singing, drawing,
mine
dancing,
eye
and the
is
modern
my heart's
languages
guest,
to deserve
and
the
in his
word.
thoughts of love doth
And
share
besides all
a
this, she must
part.
possess a certain something in her
So,
air and manner of walking,
either
the
by
tone
thy
of her voice,
picture,
her address and expressions,
or my love,
or the word will
thyself
be but half
away are
deserved.
present still with me.
All this she must
For thou no
possess,
farther
added
than my
Darcy.
thoughts canst move,
And to all
and
this,
I am
she
still
must
with
yet
them,
add something more
and they with
substantial
thee.
in the improvement of her mind by extensive
For
reading.
if they sleep,
I'm no
thy
longer surprised
picture
by your knowing
is
only
my
6
sight.
accomplished women. I
awakes
rather
my
wondered now
heart
at you knowing any.
to hearts and
Are you so
eyes.
severe upon your sex,
Delight.
upon your own sex, as to doubt the
Lovely.
possibility of all this?
Myself.
I never saw such a woman. I never saw such capacity and taste and
48.
application and elegance as you describe united. Mrs. Hurst and Mrs.
How
Bingley
careful
both cried
was
out
I
against the
when I
injustice
took my
of her
way,
implied
each
doubt,
trifle
and were both
under
protesting
truest
that they knew
bars
many
of
women who
trust,
answered this
that
description.
to my
When
use
Mr.
it might
Hurst called them
unuse
to
it
order
stay
with bitter
from
complaints
hands of
of
falsehood in such
their
wars
inattention
of trust.
to what was going forward.
But thou,
As all conversation was
to
thereby at
whom
an
my
end,
jewels
Elizabeth soon
trifles
afterwards
are,
left the room.
most worthy comfort, now my greatest grief, thou best of dearest, and mine only care art left
One
the
of those
prey
young
of every
ladies who seek to
vulgar
recommend
thief.
themselves to the other sex by
Thee
undervaluing her own.
have I not locked up in
Many
any
men, I
chest,
dare say it succeeds.
save where
In
thou
my
art
opinion,
not,
it is a paltry
though I
device,
feel
a
thou
very
art
mean
within the gentle closure of my
Undoubtedly,
breast,
replied
from
Darcy,
whence
who knew
at
this remark
pleasure
was chiefly
thou mayest
addressed.
come or
There
part.
is a meanness in all the arts,
And
which
even
ladies
thence
sometimes condescend
thou
to employ
wilt be
for captivation.
stolen, I fear,
Whatever bears
but
affinity
truth
to cunning is
proves
despicable.
thievish.
Miss Bingley was not so
Christ,
entirely
so
satisfied with this reply as to continue the subject. Elizabeth joined them again, only to say that her sister was worse, and that she could not
Aye.
leave her.
Senate.
Bingley urged
Senate?
Mr. Jones being sent for
That's not
immediately,
promising, is it?
while his sisters, convinced that no country advice could be of
Sonnet.
any service, recommended
49.
an express to town for one of the most eminent physicians. This
Against
she
that
would not
time,
hear of,
if ever
but
that
she was
time
not so
come,
unwilling to
when I
comply
shall
with
see
their
thee
brother's
frown
proposal.
on
She was
my
not so
defects.
unwilling to comply with
When
their
as thy
brother's
love hath
proposal,
cast
and
his
it was settled
utmost
that
sum,
Mr. Jones
called
should be
to
sent
that
for
audit
early
by
in the morning,
advised
if Miss
respect.
Bennet were not decidedly
Against
better.
that time, when thou
Bingley
shalt
was quite
strangely
uncomfortable.
pass,
His sisters
and
declared
scarcely
that they
greet me
were
with
miserable.
that sun thine
They
eye,
solaced their
when
wretchedness,
love,
however,
converted
by
from the thing
duets
it
after
was,
supper,
shall reasons
while
find
he
of
could find
settled
no better
gravity.
relief to his feelings than by giving his
Against that
housekeeper
time
directions that
do
every
I
attention
ensconce me
might be
here,
paid
within
to
the
sick
knowledge
lady.
of mine own desert, and this my hand against myself
You guys are all
uprear,
hanging in there.
to guard the lawful reasons on thy part.
Can't remember how to turn it.
To leave, poor me, thou hast the strength of laws. Since why to love, I can allege no cause. Sad.
Chapter 9.
Tonight's top story, missing teenager Kate Wallace.
She was so happy.
And in the morning had the pleasure of
We
being able to
arrived
send
at
a
sonnet
tolerable
50.
answer to the inquiries, after which she very early received from Mr. Bingley,
Oh, I hope
Bingley
that
by
it
a
was
housemaid,
Too much
and
of a
sometime
distraction.
afterwards from the two
It's
elegant
sonnets.
ladies who waited on his sisters.
I'm in the sun.
In spite of his amendment, however, she requested to have a note sent to Longbourn, desiring
How
her
heavy
to
do I
Jane
journey on the
and
road,
form her own
when
judgment
what
of
I
the
seek,
situation.
my weary
The note was
travels
immediately
end,
dispatched,
doth
and its
teach
contents
that
was quickly
ease
complied
and
with.
that repose
Mrs.
to
Bennet,
say,
accompanied by
thus
her two
far
youngest
the miles
children, reached
are
Netherfield
measured.
soon after the family breakfast.
The
Had she
beast
found
that bears
Jane
me,
in any apparent
tired
danger,
with my woe,
Mrs. Bennet
plods
would have been
dully
very
on to bear the
But
weight
being
in me,
satisfied on
as if
seeing
by some instinct
her,
the
on
wretch
being
did know
satisfied, sorry,
his
I'm using a
rider
format,
loved not
but
speed,
But having
being
satisfied
made
on,
from thee.
but being satisfied on seeing her,
The bloody spur
that her
cannot
illness
provoke
was not
him on,
alarming.
that sometimes
but
anger
being satisfied on
thrusts
seeing
into
her, that
his
her illness was not alarming,
which heavily he
she had no
answers
wish
with a groan,
of her
more
recovering
sharp to
immediately,
me than spurring
as her
to
restoration
his
to health
side.
would probably remove her
That
from
same
Netherfield.
groan
She
doth
would not
put
listen,
this in my
therefore, to her
mind.
daughter's proposal of being carried home.
My grief
Neither did the
lies
apothecary,
onward.
who arrived
and
about
my
the same
joy
time, think it at all advisable. After sitting a little while with Jane, on Miss Bingley's appearance and invitation, the mother and three daughters all attended her into the breakfast parlour. Mr. Bingley met them with hopes that Mrs. Bennet had not found Miss Bennet worse than she expected. Indeed, I have, sir, was her answer. She's a great deal
Thus
too ill
can
to
my
be
love
moved.
excuse
Mr. Jones
the slow
said we must
offence
not
of
think
my
of
dull
moving her.
bearer,
We must
when from
trespass a
thee
little
I
longer
speak.
on your kindness.
From where thou
Removed,
art,
cried
why
Jane.
should I
It must
haste
not be
me
thought
thence?
of. My sister,
Till
I am
I
sure, will
return,
not hear of her
of
removal.
posting is no need.
You may depend upon it, madam,
Oh, what excuse will my poor beast
that Miss
then
Bennet should
find when
receive every
swift
possible
extremity
attention while
can
she
seem
remains
but
with us.
slow?
Mrs.
Then
Bennet
should I
was profuse
spur,
in her
though
acknowledgment.
mounted on the wind,
I am
in
sure,
winged
she added,
speed,
if it were
no
not,
motion
was
shall
not
I
for such
know.
good friends, I do
Then
not know
can no
what would become
horse
of her,
with my
for she is
desire
very
keep
ill
pace.
indeed, and
Therefore,
suffers of fire.
desire,
Though with the greatest patience in the
perfect
world, which is
lust
always the way with
being
her,
made,
for she has,
shall
without exception,
nay
the
no
sweetest temper
dull
I
flesh in his fiery race, but
I often
love
tell her, my
for
other
love.
girls, they
Thus
are
shall
nothing to her.
excuse my dream.
You have a sweet room here, Mr. Bingley, and a
Since
charming
from thee
prospect over
going,
that gravel walk.
he went
I do not know a place
slow
in the country that is equal to London.
towards thee.
You will not think
I'll
me fitting you
run
in a hurry, I hope,
and give him
though you
leave
have but a short lease. Whatever I do is done in a hurry.
If you want to eat healthy and feel your best, you've got to try Kachava. Kachava is the world's healthiest.
5 minutes. At present, however, I consider myself as quite fixed here. That is exactly what I should have supposed of you, said Elizabeth. You begin to comprehend me, do you? Cried he, turning towards her. Oh, yes.
It's interesting.
I understand.
Reading something on the page and reading
I wish I might take this for a compliment, but to be so easily seen through, I am afraid, is pitiful.
Sonnet 52.
That is as it happens. It does not necessarily follow that a deep, intricate character is more or less estimable, is more or less
which she
estimable.
will not every hour survey for blunting the fine
Lizzie,
point
cried her
of
mother,
self.
remember where you are. You do not run on in the wild manner that you are suffered to do at
so
home.
solemn and so rare, since seldom comes in the long year set, like stones of worth, they thinly placed are, or kept in jewels in the carcass.
Yes, but intricate characters
So
are not amusing. They haven't used that advantage.
As my chest.
The country, said
which the road doth
can in general
to
supply
make
but
some
few subjects for
special
such a study.
instant,
In a
special
country
place.
neighborhood, will you move in a very
You
confined
unfold
and unvarying society?
imprisoned.
The people themselves alter
Blessed
so much
are you.
that there is something new to be observed in them forever. Indeed, yes, cried Mrs. Bennet, offended by his manner of mentioning a country neighborhood. I assure you there is quite as much of that going on in the country as in town.
Good morning. If
Everything
you're in
surprised,
Los Angeles.
and Darcy, after looking at her for a moment,
Or
turned
even good
silently
evening, I
away.
guess.
Mrs. Bennet, who
Well,
fancied she had
Sonnets
gained
53.
complete victory over
I
him,
like this.
continued her triumph. I cannot
What
see
is
that
your
London has
substance?
any great advantage over the country.
Whereof
For
are
my
you
part,
made?
except
That
shops
millions
and
of
public
strange
places.
shadows on
The
you
country
turn.
is a vast deal pleasanter.
Since
Is
everyone
it not,
has,
Mr. Bingley?
everyone, one shade,
When I am in
and
the
you,
country,
that one,
I
can
never
every
wish to
shadow
see
lend.
And when I am in town,
Describe
it is
a
pretty much the
ghost,
same.
and the counterfeit
They have
is
each their
poorly
advantages,
imitated.
and I can be equally happy in either.
On Helen's cheek, all art of beauty set, and you in Grecian tiles are painted
Indeed,
lean.
Mamma, you are mistaken.
Speak of the spring and poison of the
It's on the
year.
ceiling, and now I've lost my thing.
The one doth shadow your beauty show, the other,
Indeed,
as your
Mamma,
bounty
you are
doth
mistaken,
appear, and you in
said Elizabeth,
every
blushing
blessed
for her
shape
mother.
we
You
know.
quite mistook Mr. Darcy. He
In
only
all
meant that there were not
external
such a variety of people to
you
be met with
have
in the
some
country as in town, which you
Like
must
you,
acknowledge to be true.
None.
So,
None,
my dear,
you.
nobody said there were. But as to not meeting with many people in this neighborhood, I believe there are few neighborhoods
Take your weight
larger.
loss to a whole new level and double your protein for free with Nutrisystem's Premier.
Nothing but concern for Elizabeth could enable Bingley to keep his countenance. His sister was less delicate and directed her eye towards Mr. Darcy with a very expressive smile.
Oh,
Elizabeth, for
how
the sake
much
of saying
more
something that
doth
might turn
beauty
her mother's
beauteous
thoughts,
seem
now
by
asked
that
her if
sweet
Charlotte
ornament
Lucas
which
had been
truth
Longbourn
doth give.
since her coming away.
The rose
Yes,
looks
she
fair.
called yesterday with her
The
father.
fairer we deem for that sweet odour which doth in it live.
is not he.
The canker blooms
He has
have full
always
as deep a
something to
dye
say
as the
everybody.
perfumed tincture
That is
of the
my idea
roses.
of good breeding.
Hang
And
on
those
such
persons
thorns, and
who
play as
fancy
wantonly
themselves
when
very
summer's
important
breath their
and never
masked
open their
buds
mouths
discloses.
quite mistaken.
But
Did
for
Charlotte
their
dine
virtue
with you?
only
No,
is their
she would
show.
go home.
They
I
live
fancy she
unwooed
wandered about
and
the
unrespected,
For my
fade.
part, Mr. Bingley,
Die
I
to
always keep
themselves.
servants that can do their own work.
Sweet roses
My daughters are
do
brought
not
up
so.
differently. But everybody is to
Of
judge for
their
themselves,
sweet
and the
deaths
Lucases are very good
are
sorts
sweetest
of girls. Are
odours
very
made.
good sort of girls, I assure
And
you.
so
it is a pity they
of
are
you,
not handsome.
beauteous
Not that I
and
think
lovely
Charlotte
youth,
so very plain.
when that shall fade
then she is our
by
big
verse distilled.
She seems a very pleasant young woman, said Bingley. Oh,
In that
dear,
last line, there are
yes.
two words.
But you must own she is very
Fade,
plain.
which I've never encountered
Lady
before.
Lucas herself
When
has
I
often
think
said
it should
so.
be
And envied you,
fade,
Jane.
and by
I do
verse,
not like to
when
boast
really
of
it
my
should
own
be
child,
my
but
verse.
to
I'm going
be
to
sure,
read that line again so
Jane
you can hear what I mean.
one
And
does
so
not
of you,
see
beauteous
anything.
and lovely youth,
It is
when
what
that
everybody
shall
says.
fade,
I do
my
not trust my own
verse
partiality.
distills your
When she was
truth.
only 15, there was a gentleman at my
choose
brother
right.
Gardner's in
Patrick
town,
or
so much
William?
in love with her that my sister-in-law was sure
Right.
he would make her an offer before we came away. But, however, he did not. Perhaps he thought her too young.
It's
However, he
sonnet.
wrote some verses
Yeah,
on her,
and here
and
we are.
very pretty they were.
Beauty.
And so ended his affection, said Elizabeth impatiently. There has been many a one, I fancy,
Not
overcome in
marble,
the same way.
nor
I
the
wonder who
gilded
first discovered the
monuments of
efficiency of
princes
poetry in
shall
driving away love.
outlive this powerful rhyme.
I have been used to consider poetry.
You shall
as
shine
food
more
of love.
bright in these contents than
Oh,
unswept
a
stone,
fine, stout, healthy
besmeared
love it
with
may be.
sluggish
Perhaps
time.
everything nourishes what is strong already.
When wasteful
But if it be
war
only a slight, thin
shall
sort of inclination,
statues
I am
overturn,
convinced that
and
one in
broil
each sonnet will
root out
starve
the work of
entirely.
masonry, nor
Darcy
Mars his
smiled.
sword,
And
nor
the general
war's
pause
quick
which
fire
ensued
shall
made
burn
Elizabeth
the
tremble,
living record
lest her mother
of
should
your
be
memory.
exposing herself again. She longed to speak, but could
Against
think of
death
nothing to say, and after a
and
short
all
silence, Mrs.
oblivious
Bennet began
enmity
repeating her thanks to
shall
Mr.
you
Bingley for
pace
his kindness to Jane,
Your
with an
praise shall
apology for
still
troubling
find
him also
room
with Lizzie.
even in the eyes of
Mr. Bingley was
all
unaffectedly
posterity.
civil in his answer,
Wear this
and
world
forced
out
his younger sister to be civil
to the ending
also,
of doom.
and say what the occasion required.
So,
she performed her part
till the
indeed,
judgment
without much
that
graciousness.
yourself
But Mrs.
arise.
Bennet was satisfied, and soon
You
afterwards ordered her carriage.
Live in
Upon
this
this signal, the youngest of the
dwell
daughters put
in
herself
lovers'
forward.
eyes.
The two girls had been whispering to each other during the whole visit.
You
and
will
the
know
result
within a
of
few
it
days
was
exactly why you do the things you do. What this
that
week is about.
promised on his first coming into the country to give a ball at Netherfield.
Sonnet
Lydia
26.
was a stout,
No, what am I saying?
well-grown girl of 15 with a fine complexion and good-humoured countenance.
56.
A favourite of her mother, whose affection had brought her into public at an
Sweet
early
love,
age. She had
renew
high
thy thoughts.
animal spirits
Be
and
it
a
not
sort
said
of
thy
natural...
age should blunter be than appetite,
darling.
which but today by feeding is allayed,
about that.
tomorrow sharpened in his former might.
Lydia was a stout,
So
well-grown
love
girl of
be
15
thou.
with a fine complexion
Although
and
today
good-humoured
thou
countenance.
fill thy hungry
favourite with
eyes,
her mother,
even till they
whose
wink with
affection had brought
fullness,
her into public
tomorrow
at a
see again,
early
and
age.
do not
She
kill
had high
the
animal
spirit of
spirits
love
and a
with
sort
the
of
perpetual
natural
dullness.
self-consequence, which the attentions of
Let
the officers,
this
to whom her uncle's
sad
good dinners
entry,
and her own
like
easy
the
manners
ocean
recommended
be,
her, had
which parts
increased
the
into
shore,
insurance.
where two
Had increased
contracted
into
new
assurance.
come daily
She was
to the
very
banks,
equal, therefore,
that
to
when
address
they
Mr.
see
Bingley on the
return of
subject of the
love,
ball, and
more
abruptly
blessed
reminded him
may
of his
be the
promise,
view.
adding that it would be the
Or
most
call it
shameful
winter,
thing in the world if he did not
which being
keep it.
full of care,
His answer
make
to this sudden
summer's
attack was
welcome
delightful to their mother's
thrice
ear.
more wish.
I am perfectly ready, I assure you, to keep my engagement. And when your sister is recovered, you shall, if you
Now,
please,
I
name
don't
the
want you to
very
think
day of the ball.
that what's in my hand
But you
has
would not wish
anything
to be
do
dancing
with
while
what is
she
about
is
to
ill.
happen. But I have a surprise.
Lydia
for
declared herself satisfied. Oh,
This afternoon,
yes, it
we
would be
have
much
a
better to
guest
wait till Jane was well.
sonneteer.
And by
My
that time,
friends,
most likely Captain Carter will be at Meryton
Mr.
again.
Jonathan
And
Frakes.
when you have given your ball, she added, I shall insist on their
Sonnet.
giving one also. I shall tell Colonel Forster
It will be quite a shame if he does not.
Being your slave.
Mrs. Bennet and her daughters then departed, and Elizabeth returned instantly to Jane, leaving her own
I have no precious
and her
time at all
relations' behaviour
nor
to the
services.
remarks of the two ladies and Mr. Darcy. The latter
Nor
of
do
whom,
I chide the
however,
world
could
without
not be
end
prevailed
power,
on to
whilst
join in
I,
their
my
censure
sovereign,
of her,
watch
in
the
spite
clock,
of all Miss Bingley's
the
witticisms
bitterness
on
of absent
fine
sour, when you have bid your servant once adieu. Nor dare I question with my jealous thought where you may be, or your affairs suppose. But
the day
like a
passed,
sad slave,
much as the day before
stay,
had done.
think of naught,
Mrs. Hurst and Miss
save where
Bingley
you
had
are,
spent some
how
hours
happy
of the morning
you
with
make
the invalid, who continued, though slowly,
so true a fool
to
is
mend.
love.
And in the
that in your
evening,
will,
Elizabeth joined their party in the
you
drawing
do
room.
anything.
The loo table, however, did not appear. Mr. Darcy was writing, and Miss Bingley, seated
Bravo!
near him, was watching
Bravo!
the progress of his letter.
Well, you've only got another
Pulling
70
off
odd
his
to go,
attention
John.
by messages
You'll be
to
there.
his sister.
That was terrific.
Mr.
Thank you
Hurst
so much.
and Mr. Bingley were it.
Thank you, Sonny.
And
What if I told you you could get an offer on your car in minutes and keep it fresh for 7 days? With Carvana.
And was sufficiently amused
Hi.
in attending
Well,
to what passed between Darcy
Sonnet
and his
59.
companion, the perpetual
I have
commendations
an
of the
admission to
lady,
make.
either on
I've
his
tried
handwriting
and
or on
tried
the
and
evenness
tried
of his lines
to
or
understand
on the
how
length
to
of his
speak
letter,
this sonnet.
with the
And I
perfect
think
unconcern
I have
with which
no
her
idea
praises were received,
how to do it. So
formed a
please,
curious
everyone
dialogue and was exactly in
I'd
union
love to see
with
what you
her
can make.
opinion of each.
Don't tell me it's really
Right
easy.
in Miss Darcy will be
So, 59 ain't gonna happen. And here comes 60, which is one that I love. Like as the waves make towards the pebbled shore, so do our minutes hasten to their end, each changing place with that which goes before, in sequent toil all forwards to contend. Nativity, once in the main of light, crawls to maturity, wherewith being crowned, crooked eclipses gainst his glory fight, and time that gave doth now his gift confound. Time doth transfix the flourish set on youth, and delves the parallels in beauty's brow, feeds on the rarities of nature's truth,
and pray let her
and
know
nothing
that I
stands
quite rapturous with her
but
beautiful
for his
design for a table,
size
and I
to
think it
mow.
infinitely superior to Miss Grant.
And yet,
Grantly's.
to times in hope,
Will you give me leave to defer
my
your
verse
raptures
shall
till I write
stand,
again? At present,
praising
I
thy
have not room
worth,
to do them justice.
despite his cruel hand.
Oh, it is of no consequence. I shall see her in January.
Sorry it's a bit late.
But
Good night.
always write such long letters to Mrs. Darcy.
Sorry about the late
They
hour.
are generally long. Whether always charming is not quite the term.
60.
It is a rule with me that a person who can write a long letter
Is
with
it
ease
thy will
cannot
thy
write
image
ill.
should keep open my heavy
That will not do
eyelids
for a
to the
compliment
weary
to Darcy,
night?
Caroline, cried her brother,
Dost thou
because he does not
desire
write
my
with ease. He
slumber should
studies
be
too much for
broken,
words of
while
4
shadows
syllables.
like to
Do you
thee
not,
do mock
Darcy?
my sight?
My style of
Is
writing
it thy
is
spirit
very different
that
from
thou
yours.
sends from thee
Oh,
so
cried
far
Miss
from
Bingley.
home into
Charles
my
writes in the most
deeds
careless
to
way
pry,
imaginable.
to
He
find out
leaves out half
shames
of
and
the
idle
words
hours
and
in
blots
me,
the
the
rest.
scope and tenor of
My
thy
ideas
jealousy.
flow so rapidly that I have not time to
Oh,
express
no.
them. By which means my letters sometimes
Thy
convey no
love,
ideas at all
though
to my
much,
correspondence.
is not so great.
Your humility,
It is
Mr. Darcy.
my
Mr.
love
Bingley.
that keeps
Whoops.
mine eye
Your
awake.
humility, Mr.
Mine
Bingley,
own
said
true
Elizabeth.
love that doth my rest
Disarm
defeat,
reproof.
to play the watchman ever
Nothing
for
is
thy
more
sake.
deceitful, said Darcy,
For
than the
thee
appearance
watch I,
of
whilst
humility.
thou dost wake
It is often
elsewhere,
only carelessness of
from
opinion
me,
and sometimes an
far
indirect
off.
boast.
with others.
And which of the two do you call my little recent piece of modesty?
Little bit of bitterness.
He interposed. For you are really proud of your defects in writing, because you consider them as proceeding from a rapidity of thought and carelessness of execution, which, if not estimable,
Don't book a cheap hotel.
The power of doing anything with quickness is always prized much by the possessor, and often without any attention to the imperfection of the performance. When you told Mrs. Bennet this morning that if you ever resolved upon quitting Netherfield you should be gone in 5 minutes, you meant it to be a sort of... Oh my gosh, what is this
62.
word? Panegyric?
Sin, self-love, possession.
G-Y-R-I-C. Of compliment to yourself.
Sin, self-love,
And yet,
possesseth
what is
all
there
my
so very laudable in that precipitance, which must leave very necessary business undone,
sin of
and can be of no real advantage to yourself or
possesseth
anyone
all
else?
mine eye, and all my soul,
Cried Bingley,
and all
this
my
is too
every
much.
part.
To remember at night all the
And what
foolish
is
things
sin?
that were said in the
There is
morning.
no remedy.
And yet,
It is so
upon my honour,
groundward,
I believe
inward,
what I said
in
of
my
myself to be true, and I believe it at this moment.
Methinks no face
At
so
least, therefore,
gracious
I did not assume the
is as
character
mine.
of needless precipitance
No
to
shape
show
so
off
true,
before the ladies.
no truth of such account.
I dare say
and
you
for
believed
myself,
it, but
my
I am by no
own
means
worth
convinced
do
that you would be gone
as
with such
I all
celerity.
other in all
Your conduct
worths
would be quite as
sum up.
dependent on chance as that of any man I know.
But when my
And
glass
if,
shows
as you were
me
mounting your horse,
myself
a
indeed
friend were to say,
beaten
Bingley,
and
you had
chopped
better
with
stay
hand and
till next
dignity.
week. You would
My
probably
own
go.
self,
You would probably
quite
not go.
contrary, I read.
And at another word,
Self,
might
so
stay a month.
self-loving, where
You have only proved by this, cried Elizabeth,
is the
that Mr. Bingley did not do justice to his own disposition. You have shown him off now much more than he did himself.
painting my age,
I am exceedingly
beauty
gratified,
of
said
thy
Bingley,
days.
by your converting what my friend says into a compliment on the sweetness of my temper. But I am afraid you were giving it a turn which that gentleman did by no means intend. For he would
But
certainly
the reason
think better
being
of
that
me. If under
a
such
very
circumstance I
exciting
were to
new
give a flat
project
denial
has
and
come
ride off as
for me,
fast as
which
I could.
I have been attending to all
Would
night.
Mr. Darcy
And
then
so
consider the
we're going to
rashness of
take
your
a
original
very
intentions
short
as atoned
hiatus
for by your
in the
obstinacy
sonnets.
in
But
adhering to
what
them?
I'm going to do, what is taking the place of the sonnets,
My word,
is
I
something
cannot
really
exactly explain
terrific.
them.
And you will be
Darcy
able
will
to
speak
see
for
it
himself.
in 2 or 3 time. 2 or 3
You
weeks'
expect me to
time,
account for opinions
which I'm
which
very
you choose
excited.
to call mine,
So excited.
but which I have never
So,
acknowledged.
This is,
Allowing the case, however, to stand
goodbye
according
for
to your
now,
representation, you must remember,
very
Miss Bennet, that the friend who is
Sonnet
supposed to desire his
63.
return to the house and the delay of his plan has merely desired it.
Against my
asked it
love
without
shall
offering
be,
one
as I am
argument in
now,
favour of its propriety.
with time's injurious hand
To yield readily,
crushed
easily to the
and
persuasion of a
overworn.
friend is no merit
When
worthy.
hours have drained
To yield
his
without
blood
conviction
and
is no
filled
compliment
his
to the
brow
understanding
with
of either.
lines and
So
wrinkles,
here to me,
when
Mr.
his
Darcy, to allow
youthful
the importance
morn
of friendship
hath
and
travelled
affection.
on to
A regard
ages
for the requester
steepy
would often
night,
make one readily yield to a
and
request.
all
Readily
those beauties
would make one
whereof
readily
he is
yield to a
now
request,
king
without
are vanished,
waiting for
or
arguments,
vanished
the
out
reason
of
why.
sight, stealing away
I'm not
the
particularly
treasure
speaking of such a
of his
case as you
spring.
have supposed about Mr. Bingley.
For such a
We
time
may as well wait,
do I
perhaps,
now
till the circumstance
fortify
occurs
against
before we discuss the
confounding
discretion of his
age's
behaviour thereof.
cruel knife,
But in general and
that
ordinary
he shall never
cases
cut
between
from
friend and
memory
friend,
my
where
sweet
one of them is
love's
desired by the other
beauty.
to change your resolution
Though
to
my
a very
love
great
is
moment, should you think ill of
His
that person
beauty
for complying
shall,
with your desire,
in these
without
black
waiting to be
lines,
argued into it?
deceive,
Would it not be
And they
advisable
shall
before
live,
we proceed on the subject to arrange
and
with
be
rather
in
more precision the degree of importance which is to appertain to this request, as well as the degree of intimacy subsisting between the parties?
Answer this question. What matters more to you than money?
Let us hear all the particulars, not forgetting their comparative height and size. For that will have more weight in the argument. This Bennet,
been more
Ben may
than
be
a brief
aware of. I assure you that if Darcy were not such
And I
a
have
great
missed
tall fellow in
our
comparison with
sonnet
myself, I should not pay
But
him half so much.
The project that
I
I
declare
mentioned
I do not
when
know
I
a more
took this
awful
pause
object than Darcy.
was nothing more
On
than
particular
an
occasions,
invitation I
and in
had
particular
to
places,
write a memoir
at his own
or
house.
an autobiography. So I needed to take all that time, the 4 or 5 weeks that have gone by,
When he has
to get
nothing to
into
do.
it, which I have. It is well underway and I'm
But
enjoying
Elizabeth
it
thought she could
enormously.
perceive that he was rather
So,
offended.
picking up where
And
we left
therefore
off,
checked
Sonnet
her life.
64.
Miss Bingley warmly resented the indignity he had received in an
When I have seen by
expostulation
time's
with her
fair
brother
hand
for talking
defaced
such nonsense.
the rich, proud
I
cost
see your
of
design,
outworn,
Bingley,
buried
said his
age.
friend. You dislike
When
an
sometimes
argument.
lofty
and want
towers I
silence.
see down raised and
Perhaps
brassy
I do. Arguments are
tongues
too much
slave
like
to
stewards.
mortal rage.
If you and Miss Bennet will defer
And I have
yours
seen
run out of the
the
room,
hungry ocean
I shall be
gain
very
advantage on the
and then you
kingdom
may
of
say
the
whatever you
shore,
like of me.
and the firm soil win of the
What
water
you
remain,
ask, said
increasing
Elizabeth,
store
sacrifice on my
with
side.
loss, and
Mr.
loss
Darcy had much
with
better
store.
finish his letter.
When I have seen
Darcy took
such
her
interchange
advice.
of state,
And
or
did
state itself confounded
When that
to
business was
decay,
over, he applied to Miss
ruin
Bingley
has
and
taught me
for an indulgence
thus
of some
to
music.
illuminate.
Miss Bingley moved
The
with some
time
alacrity to
will
the
come
pianoforte, and after a polite request
and
from
take
Elizabeth to
me
lead the way,
away.
which the other
This
lead the way,
thought
which the other as politely
as
and
a
more
death,
earnestly negated.
which cannot
Negative.
choose
Negative.
but weep to have that
Mrs. Hurst
which
sang
it
with her
fears
sister,
to lose.
and while they were just thus employed, Elizabeth could not help observing, as she turned over some music books that lay on the instrument, how frequently Mr. Darcy's
Well,
eyes
Sonnet
were fixed on her.
65. And
She hardly knew how
I
to
have a
suppose
feeling
that she could be an
that I
object
have
of
known
admiration
this
to so
sonnet
great a
since I
man,
was a teenager.
and yet that he should look
It
at
is
her because
one
he
of the
disliked
most
her
famous,
was still more
and it is
strange.
extraordinary.
She could only imagine, however, at last that she drew his notice because there was something more wrong
Since
and reprehensible,
brass,
according to his
nor
ideas of
stone,
right, than in any
nor
other
earth,
person's judgment.
nor boundless
The
sea,
supposition did not say
but sad
she liked him too little
mortality
to care for
all
his reputation.
sways their power.
After playing some Italian
How
songs,
that
Miss Bingley
this
varied the
rage
charm
should
by a lively
enter
Scottish air, Scotch air, and soon afterwards Mr. Darcy, drawing near Elizabeth, said to her,
Oh, how
"Do you
shall
not feel a
summer's
great
honey
inclination,
breath
Bennet,
hold out
to see
against the
yourself
wrathful
guilty
sea
of dancing a
of
reel?"
battering days,
She smiled,
when
but
rocks
made no answer.
impregnable are not so
He repeated
stout,
the question,
nor
with
gates of
some
steel
surprise and
so
silence.
strong.
"Oh," said she, "I heard you before, but I could not immediately determine what to say in reply.
Meditation.
You wanted me, I know, to say
Where,
yes,
alack,
that you might
shall
have the pleasure of
time's
despising
best
my taste.
jewel from time's
But I always
chest
delight in
lie
overthrowing
hid?
those kind of schemes,
Or what
and
strong
cheating a person
hand
of their
can hold his
premeditated
swift
contempt.
foot back?
I have therefore made up my mind to tell you that I do
the
not want to
spoil
dance a
of
reel at all,
Can forbid.
and now despise me if you dare.
Oh, no.
Indeed, I do not dare."
Unless
Elizabeth,
this
having rather expected to
mirror
confront him, was amazed at his gallantry, but there was a mixture
in
of
black
sweetness and
ink
archness in her
my
manner,
love
which made it difficult for her to affront anybody. And Darcy had never been so bewitched by any woman as he was with her. He really believed that were it not for the inferiority of her connections, he should be in some danger. Miss Bingley
this is
saw,
not our
or suspected enough to be jealous,
set.
and her great anxiety for the recovery of her dear
Nor
friend
is
Jane
it
received some
customary
assistance
that I
from
am
her
actually
desire
going
of
to
getting rid of
pass
Elizabeth.
on 4 sonnets,
She often tried to provoke
66
Darcy into
through
disliking her
70,
guest
because
by talking of their supposed
can't do
marriage
them.
and planning his happiness in such an alliance.
So we're moving on to 71, which in a way seems to be
said she, as they were walking together in the shrubbery the next day,
appropriate.
"You will give your mother-in-law a few hints
71.
when this desirable event
No
takes
longer
place, and for the
mourn for
advantage
me
of
when I am dead. Then you shall hear the surly sullen bell give warning to the world that I am fled from this vile world, with vilest worms to dwell.
something bordering on conceit
Nay,
and purpose,
if you read
which
this
your
line,
lady possesses.
remember not the hand that writ it,
Have you anything
For
else
I
to
love
propose
you
for my
so
domestic
that
felicity?
I, in your sweet
Yes.
thoughts,
Do let the
would
portraits
be
of your
forgot.
uncle and Aunt Phillips
If
be placed in
thinking
the
on
gallery
me,
at Pemberley.
then should
Put them
make
next to
you
your great uncle the judge. They are in the same profession.
Oh, if I say you look upon
As
this
for your
verse
Elizabeth's
when I
picture,
perhaps
you
compounded
must have
and play, do not so much as my poor name
easy indeed to
rehearse.
catch their
But
expression.
let your love,
But their colour and shape
even
and
with
the
my
eyelashes,
life,
so remarkably
decay.
fine, might be copied.
lest
And
the
that lovely
wise
woman for
world
another walk
should look into
by
your
Mrs.
moan
Hurst and Elizabeth.
and mock you with me
I did not know that you
after
intended
I'm
to
gone.
said Miss Bingley in some confusion, lest they had been
Take your weight loss to a whole new level and double your protein for free with Nutrisystem's Premier Upgrade event. For a limited time, get your first month of Hearty Inspirations, our new premium meals free, including new skillet dinners that go from pan to plate in minutes. Hearty meals with double the protein.
Mr. Darcy felt their rudeness and immediately
Sonnet
said, "This walk is not wide enough for our party.
Here
We had
in
better
the
go
pine
into
woods
the avenue."
and with the birds in the
But
background, I hope
Elizabeth,
you can hear,
who had not the
and
least
these
inclination to
beautiful
remain with them,
wildflowers,
laughingly
these are
answered,
planted
"No,
there.
stay where you are. You are charmingly grouped."
So, here we go.
And appear to uncommon
Inspired
advantage.
by that.
The picturesque would be spoiled by
Sonnet
missing
72.
Goodbye.
Oh,
She
lest
then
the
ran
world
gaily off,
should task
rejoicing
you
as she
to
ran
recite
about
what merit
in the
lived
hope of
in
being
me
at
that
home
you
again
should
in a
love.
day or two. Jane
After
was
my
already
death,
so much
dear
recovered
love,
as to intend
forget me
leaving the
quite,
room
for
a
you
couple of
and
hours.
me can nothing worthy prove.
Chapter
Unless you
11.
would devise some virtue
When the ladies
to do more for me than
Elizabeth
mine
ran
own
up to her
desert,
sister and seeing her
hang
well guarded
praise
before,
upon
attended her into the drawing room,
the nigger
where she was
truth would
welcomed by her
willingly
two friends with many conditions of pleasure.
Oh, lest
And
your
Elizabeth
true love
had
may
never
seem
seen them
false
so
in this,
agreeable as they
that
were
you
during the
for
hour
love
which passed
speak
before
well
the
of
gentleman
me
appeared.
untrue.
Their
My name
powers
would
of
bury
conversation
where my
were
body
considerable.
is, and
They
live
could
no more to
describe
shame nor me,
entertainment with
nor you.
accuracy, relate
For
an
I
anecdote
am
with
shamed
humour,
by that
and
which I
laugh at
bring
their
forth,
acquaintance.
and so should you.
But
To
when the
love
gentleman entered, Jane was no longer the
Nothing
first
worse.
object. Miss Bingley's eyes were instantly turned toward Darcy, and she had something to say to him before he
Sonnet
had
73. I
advanced
think
many steps.
I have
He addressed
been
himself to Miss Bennet
reading
with her
the
polite
sonnets
congratulation.
and working
Mr.
on it
Hurst
with
also
people
made
like
her
John
a slight
Barton
bow
for decades.
and said he was
So,
very glad. But
it's
diffuseness and
kind
warmth
of internal.
remained
But
for
who
Bingley's
knows?
salutation.
It's about twilight.
He was full of joy and attention.
That time
The
of
first
year
half
is
hour
our
was
best
spent
in
in
me
piling up the
behold.
fire, lest she should
When
suffer
yellow
from the
leaves,
change of the room.
or none,
and
or
change
few,
of room. And
do
she
hang upon
removed
those boughs
at his desire
which
to the other
shake
side of the
against the cold.
fireplace, that she might be further
Bare
from the door.
ruined choirs,
He then
where
sat down
late
by
the
her
sweet
and
birds
talked,
sang.
scarcely to anyone else.
In me
Elizabeth,
thou seest
at
the
work in the opposite
twilight of
corner,
such day
saw it all
as
with
after
great
sunset fadeth in the
When
west.
tea was over, Mr. Hurst
Which by and
reminded
by
his sister-in-law
Black
of
night
the card
doth
table,
take away
but in vain.
Death's
She had
second
obtained
self
private intelligence that
that
Mr. Darcy did
seals
not
up
wish for
all
cards, and Mr. Hurst soon found even his open
In
petition
me
rejected. She
thou
assured
seest
him
the
that no one
glowing
intended
of
to
such
play.
fire that on the
Silence of the
ashes
whole
of his
party on the
youth doth
subject
lie,
seemed
as
to
the
justify
deathbed wherein it must
Mr.
expire,
Hurst had therefore
consumed with that
but
which
to
it
stretch
was
himself
nourished
on
on.
one of the sofas and go to sleep.
This
Darcy
thou
took up a book,
perceivest,
Miss Bingley
which
did the
makes
same,
thy love
and Mrs.
more
Hurst,
strong,
principally occupied in
to
playing with
love
the bracelets
that well,
and rings, joined now and then in her brother's conversation with Miss Bennet. Miss Bingley's attention was quite as much engaged in watching Mr. Darcy's progress through his book as in reading her own, and she was perpetually either making some inquiry or looking at his page. She could not win him, however,
am not
to any
sure
conversation.
what
He
connection
merely
there might be
answered her question
between Mono Lake, which you
at
see
length,
behind
quite
me,
exhausted by the
and
attempt to be
Central
amused with her own
Park,
book, which she had only
and
chosen
Shakespeare's
because it was the
sonnets.
second volume of his.
except
She gave a great yawn and
they
said,
are both very unusual.
To spend an evening in this way, I declare. After all, there is no enjoyment like reading.
Maybe these are the first
Much sooner one tires of anything other than a book. When I have a house of my
74.
own, I shall be miserable if I have not.
But be contented when that fell arrest without all bail shall carry me away.
Then
my life
yawned
hath
again,
in this line
threw aside
some
the book,
rest, which for memorial still with thee shall stay.
When hearing her brother mention
When thou
to Miss
reviewest
Bennet, she
this,
turned suddenly
thou
towards
dost
him and said,
review the very
By
part
the way,
was
by the by, Charles, are you really
thee.
serious in meditating
The
a
earth
dance at Netherfield?
can have but earth,
I
which
would
is
advise
his
you before you determine on it to consult the wishes of the president.
better part of
I'm
me.
much mistaken if there are not some
So
among us to
then,
whom a
thou hast but
ball
lost
would be rather
the dregs
unpunishable
of
than a
life,
pleasure.
the prey of worms,
If you mean
my
Darcy,
body being dead, the coward
He may go to
conquest
bed,
of a wretch's
if he
life,
chooses, before it begins.
too base
But as for the
of
ball,
thee to be
it is
remembered.
quite a simple thing, and as soon as
The
Nicholas
worth
has made
of
white
that
soup enough,
Is that
I shall send
which
round
it
my
contains.
cards.
And that is this.
I should like balls infinitely better, she replied, if they were
with
carried on
thee
in a different
remains.
manner. But there is something insufferably tedious in the usual process of such a meeting. It would surely be much more rational if conversation instead of dancing were made the order of the day.
Lots of bugs.
Much more rational, my dear Caroline, I dare say, but it would not be near so much like a ball.
You ever wondered what
no answer,
actors
and soon
and actresses do when they have to get in shape really fast for a
the
movie?
room. Her figure was elegant and she walked well.
Sonnet
But Darcy, at
75.
whom it was all aimed, was still inflexibly studious. In the
So
desperation of her
are you
feelings,
to my
she
thoughts,
resolved
as
one
food
one
to
effort
life,
more.
or
turning
as
to
sweet
Elizabeth,
season showers
said,
are to the
Listen,
bride.
Isaac Bennet, let me persuade
And for the
you to
peace
follow
of
my
you
example
I
and
hold
turn
such
about the
strife,
room.
as twixt a miser and his wealth is
After
found.
sitting so long in one
Now
attitude.
proud as an enjoyer,
Elizabeth was
and anon
surprised, but agreed to it
doubting
immediately.
the
Miss
filching
Bingley
aid
succeeded
will
no less in
steal
the real
his
object
treasure.
of her civility, Mr. Darcy.
Now counting
Mrs.
best
Bingley
to be with
succeeded
you alone,
no less in the real
then
object of her civility.
better that the world
Darcy
may
looked
see
up.
my pleasure.
He was as much awake
Sometime
to the
all
novelty
full
of
with
attention in
feasting
that
on
quarter
your
as
sight,
Elizabeth herself
and by
could
and by, clean
and
starved
unconsciously
for a look,
closed his book.
possessing
He was
or
directly
pursuing
invited
no
to join
delight
the party,
save what is had
but he
or
declined
must
it,
from
observing
you
that he could
be took.
imagine but two motives
Thus
for their choosing to walk up
do
and
I
down the room
pine
together, with
and
either
surfeit
of which
day
motives
by day,
his joining them would
or
interfere.
gluttoning on all,
What could he mean?
or
She was
all
dying to know
away.
what could be his meaning, and asked Elizabeth whether she could at all understand him. Not at all, was her answer, but depend upon it, he means to be severe honest. And our surest way of disappointing him will be to ask nothing about
went
it.
on to, we're about to go
Miss Bingley, however, was incapable of disappointing Mr. Darcy in anything, and persevered, therefore, in requiring an explanation of his two motives.
I think it must be my
I have not the smallest objection in explaining them, said he, as soon as she allowed him to speak.
as we say.
You either choose this
So,
method of passing the
backtracking.
evening because
Sonnet
you are in each
76,
other's
and
confidence
it's
and have secret affairs to discuss, or because you are conscious that your figures appear to the greatest
Why
advantage in
is my
walking.
verse
If
so
the first, I would
barren
be
and
completely in your way,
so
and
far
if the
from
second,
variation
I can
or
admire
quick
you
change?
much better. As I
Why
said.
with the time do I not glance aside to newfound methods and to
Shocking!
compound
Cried Miss
strain?
Bingley. I never heard anything
My
so
writers
abominable.
still all one,
How
ever
shall
the
we
same,
punish him for
and
such
keep
a speech?
invention in a noted
Nothing so
weed.
easy. If you have but the
That every
inclinations of
word
Elizabeth,
could almost tell
we
my
can all
name,
plague and punish one
showing their
another, tease
birth
him, laugh
and where
at him.
they did proceed.
Intimate
Oh,
as you
no,
are, you must know
sweetheart.
how it is to be
I
done.
always write
But upon my honour, I do not.
you
I do assure you that my intimacy has not yet taught me that. tease calmness of manner
all
and
my
presence
best
of mind.
Is dressing.
No, I feel he
over
may
you,
defy us there.
spending again.
And as to laughter, we will not expose ourselves, if
as the
please,
sun is
by attempting to
daily
laugh without a
new
subject.
and old.
Mr. Darcy
So is
may
my
hug
love.
himself.
Still,
Mr.
telling
Darcy is not to be laughed at,
is told.
cried Elizabeth. That is an uncommon advantage. And uncommon, I hope it will continue, for it would be a great loss to me
I see you,
to have
Francesca.
many such acquaintances.
Love the energy today. Climbing the leaderboard.
For loving the feeling
Go, 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 boom!
and feeling the love.
Has given
Personal
me more
best.
credit
You
than
crushed it.
Fitness
the
changes
wisest and
lives.
the best of men, nay, the wisest and best of their actions, may be rendered ridiculous by a person whose first object in life is a joke.
you catch me doing
Certainly,
kitchen
I
duties.
listen. There are such people,
Get to do
but I hope I'm not one
I
of
wonder
them.
if you know what these are.
I hope I never
These
ridicule
are
what is
called
wise and good.
Cranberry beans.
Follies and nonsense, whims and inconsistencies do divert me,
And-
I own, and I laugh at them whenever I can.
Delicious. On a
These,
salad.
I
Or
suppose,
in a bean
are
stew.
precisely what you are
Fantastic.
without.
So I don't mind being committed to doing all this darn shelling.
But it has
because
been the study of
end
my life to
result is
avoid
gonna
those
make it all
weaknesses which
worthwhile.
often expose a
However,
strong
put them
understanding
aside
of
and
such as vanity and
Shakespeare
pride.
sonnets.
Yes, vanity is a weakness indeed, but pride, where there is a real superiority of mind, pride
Sonnet
will always be under
77.
good regulation. Elizabeth turned away
The
to
glass will show thee how
Your
thy
examination of
beauties
Mr.
were.
Darcy is over, I
Thy
presume, said
dial,
Miss Bingley.
how thy
And
precious
pray,
minutes
what is the
waste.
result? I am
The
perfectly
vacant
convinced by
leaves
it
thy
that Mr.
mind's
Darcy has
imprint
no
will
defect.
bear, and of this book,
He owns
this
it himself
learning,
without disguise.
there's thou taste.
No, said Darcy, I have made no such pretension. I have faults enough, but they are not, I
Malvet
hope, of
grains
understanding.
will give thee
My temper I dare not vouch for. It is, I
Thou
believe,
by thy dial shady stealth mayest
Certainly
know
suitable for the
time's
convenience of the
thievish
world.
progress
I cannot
to
forget the follies and
eternity.
vices of others so soon as I ought.
Look what thy
nor their
memory cannot
offences against
contain.
myself.
Commit
My feelings
to
are not
these
puffed
waste
about with
blanks,
every attempt
and thou
to
shalt
move them.
find
My temper
those
would perhaps
children
be called
nursed,
resentful.
delivered
My good
from
opinion
thy
once
brain
lost.
to take a
Lost
new
forever.
acquaintance of thy
That is a failing indeed, cried Elizabeth.
These
Implacable
officers,
resentment is a shade and a
so
character,
oft as thou
but you have
wilt
chosen your fault well.
shall profit thee
I really cannot laugh.
and much enrich.
You are safe from me. There is, I believe, in every disposition a tendency to some particular evil, a natural defect, which not even the best education can overcome. And your defect is to hate everybody. And yours, he replied with a smile, is willfully to misunderstand.
So
Oh,
oft
let us have a little music,
invoked thee
cried Miss
for
Bingley,
my
tired of a
use,
conversation in
and
which she
found
had no
such
share.
fair assistance
Louisa,
in
will you not mind my
And every alien pen hath got my
Her sister
use,
had not
and
spoken
under
to
thee
and
their
the pianoforte
poesy
was opened, and
dispersed.
Darcy, after a few moments' recollection,
Thine
was not
eyes
sorry for it.
that taught the dumb on high
Began
to
to
sing,
feel the danger.
and heavy
Paid
ignorance
Elizabeth
aloft
much
to
attention.
fly, have
Chapter
added
12.
feathers to the learned's wing.
In
and given
consequence of an
grace
agreement between the sisters, Elizabeth wrote the next morning to their mother
Yet
to beg that
be
the
most
carriage might be
proud
sent
of that
for them
which I
in the course of the day.
whose influence
But Mrs.
is
Bennet, who had
thine,
calculated on her
and
daughters
born
remaining at
of
Netherfield the following Tuesday,
in other works that
which would
thus
exactly
mend
finish Jane's
us,
week,
and
could not
arts
bring herself
with
to
thy
receive them with
sweet
pleasure
graces,
before.
graced
Her answer,
be
therefore, was not propitious,
that thou art
at least
all
not to
my
Elizabeth's wishes, for
and thus
she was
advance
impatient to get home.
as high
Mrs. Bennet
as
sent them
low.
word that they could not possibly have the carriage before Tuesday. And in her postscript it was added that if Mr. Bingley and his sister pressed them to stay longer, she could spare them very well.
Don't book a cheap hotel.
Against staying longer, however, Elizabeth was positively resolved.
Hello?
Nor did she
Book an
expect
expensive
it would be
hotel
asked.
for cheap on
Being
Hotwire.
fearful
So
of the
diamond
contrary,
scented.
as being considered as intruding themselves into this too long, she urged Jane to borrow Mr. Bingley's carriage immediately. and at length it was settled that their original design of leaving Netherfield that morning should be mentioned, and the request.
Sonnet 79.
The communication excited many professions,
I alone did call
excited
upon
many
thee.
professions of concern,
My verse
and
alone
enough was said,
had all
wishing
my
them to stay at
tender
least till the following day to
now,
work on Jane.
my
And till
greatest
the morrow
numbers
their
are
going was
decayed,
deferred.
and my sick
Miss Bingley
muse
was then
doth give
sorry
another
that she had proposed the delay, for her
I
jealousy
grant,
and
sweet
dislike
love,
of
thy
one
lovely
sister
argument deserves
much
the
exceeded
travail
her
of a
affection
worthier
for the
pen.
other. The
Yet
master
what
of
a
the house
deed thy
heard
poet doth
really
invent.
sorry
He
that
robs
they
thee
were to go
of
so soon,
and pays
repeatedly
thee
tried to
again.
persuade Miss Bennet that it
He
would
lends
only
thee
seem
virtue, and
that she was not enough
bestowed
recovered.
that word.
But Jane was
Thy
firm
behaviour,
where she felt herself
beauty
to
doth
be
he
wrong.
give, and found
To
it
Mr. Darcy,
in thy
it was
cheek.
welcome intelligence.
He can afford no
Elizabeth
praise to
had
thee.
been at Netherfield long.
What in thee doth
She attracted him more than he liked.
then
And Miss Bingley
thank him
was uncivil to her and more teasing
which
than
he
usual
doth
to
say,
himself. He
since
wisely
what
resolved
he
to be
owes
particularly
thee,
careful that no sign of admiration should
thyself
now escape him.
dost pay.
Nothing that could elevate her with the hope of influencing his felicity. Sensible that if such an idea had been suggested, his behavior during the last day must have material
Well,
weight
I've
in
got
confirming
myself
or
a
crushing
little
it.
confused.
Steady
because
to
I
his
had not
purpose, he
realised
scarcely
that
spoke 10
we
words
were
to her through the
at a
whole of
rather
Saturday.
significant point.
And though they
So,
were at one time left
just
by
passed
themselves,
our friend.
half an hour,
Still,
he adhered most
74.
conscientiously to his book.
But not only
Would not even look at her.
we are
On Sunday, after morning service, a separation so agreeable to almost all took
because
place.
tomorrow
Miss Bingley's civility to Elizabeth increased at last very rapidly, as
So,
well as her
thank you
affection for Jane.
tuning in.
And when they parted, after assuring the latter,
try and make the
after assuring the latter of the pleasure
as possible.
it would
Here we go.
always give her to see her either
Sonnet
at
80.
Longbourn or Netherfield, and embracing her most tenderly. She even shook hands with the former.
You see how
Elizabeth took leave of the whole party in the liveliest of spirits.
Oh,
They were
how
not welcomed
faint
home very
when
cordially by their
I
mother.
doth
Mrs. Bennet wondered
knowing
at their coming.
a better spirit
It was
revealed
very
your
wrong to
name,
give so much
and in the
trouble,
praise
and was
thereof
sure Jane
spends
would have
all
called
his
again.
might to make
Their
me
father,
tongue-tied,
though very laconic
speaking
in
of
his
your
expression
fame.
of pleasure, was
But
really
since
glad.
your worth
He had felt
wide
their
as the
importance
ocean
in the
is,
family circle.
the humble as
The
the
evening
proud
conversation,
sing,
when they were all assembled,
my
had
saucy
lost
bark,
much of its animation,
inferior
and
far
almost
to
all its
his,
sense
on
by the
your
absence of
broad
Jane
name
and
doth
Elizabeth.
wilfully appear.
They found Mary, as usual, deep in
Your
the study of
shallowest help
thoroughbass.
will hold me up afloat.
Race. They found
Whilst
Mary, as
he,
usual, deep in the
upon
study
your
of
soundless
thorough
deep doth
base
lie,
and human
or
nature,
being racked,
and had
I am
some
a
extracts
worthless
to
boat,
admire,
he of
and some
tall
new
building
observations
and of
of
goodly
threadbare
eyes.
morality to listen to.
Then,
Catherine and Lydia
if
had
he
information
thrive,
for them
and
of a
I be
different
cast
sort.
away,
Much had been done,
the
and
worst
much had been
was
said
this.
in a regiment since the preceding Wednesday.
My love
Several of the officers had
was
dined
my
with their
decay.
uncle. A private had been flogged, and it had actually been hinted that Colonel
See you
Forster was going to be married.
Most collagen supplements have this. But did you know there are actually 16 types of collagen, all from different sources with their own benefits? To simplify things, roughly 80 to 90% of collagen in the human body consists of types 1, 2, and 3. And humans can find benefit from consuming 5 of these types. These 5 types are found in nature, in the connective tissues of animals.
And I hope my dinners are good enough for her. I do not believe she often sees
Shakespeare's Sonnet 81.
The person of whom I speak is a gentleman.
Or I shall live your epitaph to make, or you survive when I am earth and rotten. From hence your memory death cannot take, although in me each part will be forgotten. Your name from hence immortal life shall have, though I, once gone to all the world, must die. The earth can yield me but a common grave, when you entomb it, in its eyes shall lie. Your monument shall be my gentle verse, which eyes not yet created shall all read, and tongues to be your being shall rehearse. When all the breathers of this world are dead, you still shall live. Such virtue has my pen, where breath most breathes, even in the mouths of men. And a very happy birthday, dear Patrick. Lots of love.
Who, when I'm dead, may turn you all out of this house as soon as he pleases. Oh,
Hi.
my dear.
Well, yesterday we had a guest sonneteer.
I do think it is the hardest thing in the world that your estate should be entailed away from your own.
It was unpredictable, and I was thrilled that
should have tried long ago to do something or other about it.
Working. And
Jane
I
and
am
Elizabeth tried to
considering
explain to her the nature
maybe inviting
of an entail. They had often
other
attempted to do it
friends,
before,
other guests,
but it
to
was a
give that
subject on which
version
Mrs. Bennet was
also.
beyond the reach
We'll
of
see.
reason.
Down the
And she
road,
continued to rail bitterly
Thank you,
against the
Ian,
cruelty of settling
for
an
doing
estate away
81.
from a family.
And here we are with
in
82.
favour of a man whom nobody cared anything about. It certainly is a most iniquitous.
I grant thou wert not married to my muse,
affair,
and therefore mayest without
nothing
a
can clear
taint
Mr.
o'erlook
Collins
the
from the guilt
dedicated
of
words which writers use
But
of their
if
fair
you
subject,
listen to
blessing
his letter,
every book.
You may perhaps
Thou
be
art as fair in knowledge as in hue, finding thy worth a limit past my praise, and therefore art enforced to seek anew some fresher stamp of the time-bettering days.
Why could he not keep on quarrelling
And
with you,
do so
as his father did before him?
Yet, when they have devised what strained touches rhetoric can lend, thou, truly fair, wert truly sympathized in true, plain words by thy true telling friend.
Between yourself and my late honored
And
father
there,
always gave me
gross
much
painting might be better used where cheeks need blood.
I have frequently wished to heal the
thee.
breach.
It
But
is
for
of
some
use.
time I was kept back by my own doubts, fearing lest it might seem disrespectful to his memory for me to be on good terms with anyone with whom
See you tomorrow.
it always pleased him to be at variance. There.
Some carriers will give you just one measly entertainment subscription. One is no fun. With Verizon, there's up to 7 entertainment subscriptions with your unlimited plan. That's 7.
To be distinguished by the patronage of the Right Honourable Lady Catherine de Bourgh, widow of Sir Louis de Bourgh, whose bounty and beneficence has preferred me to the valuable rectory of this parish, where it shall be my earnest endeavour to redeem myself with grateful respect towards her ladyship, and be ever ready to perform those rites and ceremonies which are instituted by the Church of England.
I never saw
As a
that
clergyman,
you did
moreover, I
painting
feel it is
me,
my duty
and
to promote
therefore
and
to your
establish the
fair,
blessing of peace
no
in all
painting
families
set.
within the reach of my influence.
I
And on
found,
these
or
grounds,
thought I
I
found,
flatter myself
you did
my present
exceed the
overtures are
barren
highly
tender
commendable,
of a
and that
poet's
the
death.
circumstance of my being next in the
And
attainment
therefore
of long
have I
estate
slept in your
will be
report
kindly overlooked,
that you yourself, being
and not
extant,
lead you to
well
reject
might show how
the
far a
offer
modern
of the
quill doth come too short.
cannot be otherwise than concerned
Speaking of
at
worth,
being the means of injuring your
what worth
amiable
in you
daughters,
doth grow?
and beg leave to apologize
This
for it.
silence for my
well as
sin
to
you
assure
did
you of my
impute,
readiness
which
to make
shall
them
be
every
most my
possible
glory, being dumb, for
this
I
hereafter.
impair not beauty,
If you should
being
have no
mute,
objection to receive
when
me
others
into your house,
would give
I
life
propose myself
and
the
bring
satisfaction
a
of waiting
tomb.
on you and your family Monday,
There
November
lies
18,
more life in
4
one.
o'clock, and shall probably trespass on your
I
hospitality
was still thinking about the
till
previous line
the
and then
Saturday.
read the wrong thing
in the
Cell
line.
90
No,
follows,
that line.
which I can do without any
12,
inconvenience.
and I'll
as
go back to line.
Lady
I'm going back to
Catherine
line 9
is far
because
from objecting
I did
to
a
my
wrong
occasional
emphasis.
absence on a Sunday, provided that some other
This
person
silence for
is
my
engaged
sin
in
you
the
did
duty of the
impute,
day.
which shall be
I
most
remain,
my
dear
glory,
sir,
being
with respectful
done.
compliments to your
For I
lady and
impair not
your
beauty,
well-wisher and
being
friend,
mute. When others would give life, when others would give life
we may
and
expect
bring
this
a tomb.
peacemaking gentleman, said Mr. Bennet as he folded up the letter. He seems to be a most conscientious
There
and
lives
polite
more
young man.
life in one
My word,
of your
and I
fair eyes
doubt not will
than
prove a
both
valuable
your
acquaintance,
poets
especially if
can in
Lady Catherine should be
praise
so indulgent as to let him come to us again.
He's angry.
There is
really-
some sense in what he says about the girls, however,
Anyway.
and if he is disposed
See you in 84 tomorrow.
to make them any amends, I shall not be a person
Well,
to discourage.
84.
Though it is difficult,
is
said
waiting
Jane,
for
to
us.
guess in what way he can mean to make us the atonement he thinks our due. The wish is
Who is
certainly
it
to
that
be
says most, which
Elizabeth
can
was
say
chiefly
more
struck
than
by
this
his
rich
extraordinary
praise,
deference for Lady
that you
Catherine,
alone are
and
you,
his kind
in whose
intention of christening,
confine,
marrying, and
immured
burying
is the
his
store,
parishioners
which should
wherever it
example
required.
where your equal grew.
Must be an oddity, I think. said
Lean penury within that pen doth dwell,
There
that
is
to his
something very
subject
pompous in
lends
his style,
not some
and what
small
can he mean by
glory,
apologizing
but
for
he
the
that
next
writes of
event?
you, if he can tell that
Suppose
you
he
are
would help
you,
it if he could.
so dignifies
Would he be
his
a sensible
story.
man, sir? No,
Let him
my
but
dear, I
copy
think not.
what in
I have
you
great
is
hopes of
writ,
finding him
not making worse
There is a
what
mixture
nature
of
makes
civility
so
and some
clear.
importance in his letter,
And
which
such a
promises
counterpart
well.
shall fame his wit, making his style admired everywhere.
Composition, said Mary.
You,
The letter
to your
does not
beauteous
seem
blessings,
defective.
add
The
a
idea
curse,
of the olive
being
branch
fond on
perhaps
praise,
is not wholly
which
new.
makes your praises
Yet I think it is well
worse.
expressed. To Catherine and Lydia,
very
neither
nice,
the letter nor its writer were in any degree interesting. It was next to impossible that their cousin should come in a scarlet coat, and it was now some weeks since they had received pleasure from the
Well,
society of a man in any other
Sonnet
colour.
85.
As for their mother, Mr. Collins's letter had
This
done
one
away
is
with
really
much of her
hard.
ill will, and she was preparing to see him with a degree of composure which astonished her husband.
85.
Mr. Collins was
My tongue-tied muse in manners holds her still, while comments of your praise richly
Mr. Bennet
compiled
indeed said little.
reserve their
The
character
ladies were
with
ready enough to
golden
talk,
quill
and Mr. Collins seemed
precious
neither in
phrase
need of
by
encouragement
all the muses
nor
fill.
inclined to be silent himself. He was a tall, heavy-looking young man of 25. His air was grave and steady, and his manners were very formal. He had not been
My
long seated
tongue-tied
before he
muse
complimented
in
Mrs.
manners
Bennet on
holds
having
her
so
still,
fine a family
while
of
comments of your
said
praise
he had
richly
heard much of their
compiled
beauty,
reserve their
but that
character
in
with golden
this
quill
instance
and precious
fame had fallen
phrase
short
by
of the
all
treble,
the muses
and added
fine.
that he did not doubt her
I
seeing
think good thoughts,
futile
while other write good words,
in marriage.
and like
This gallantry
unlettered
was not
clerk,
much to the taste
still
of some of his
cry,
hearers.
Amen,
But Mrs. Bennet, who
to
quarrelled
every
with no
hymn
compliments,
that able spirit
answered
affords,
most readily.
in polished
"You are
form,
very kind,
well-refined
and I wish
pen.
with all my heart it may prove so.
Hearing
for
you
else they
praised,
will
I say, "'Tis so, 'tis true." And to the most of praise, add something more.
Oh,
That
sir, I do indeed.
is in my
It is a
thought,
grievous affair to
whose
a poor
love
girl.
to you,
Pathetic.
though words
Not
come
that I need to find
hindmost,
fault with you for
holds
such things
his
I know
rank
are of
before.
chance in this world. There is
Then
no knowing how
others
mistakes
for the
go
breath of
when
words
once they
respect,
come to be entailed.
me for my dumb thoughts, speaking in effect.
And could say much on the subject, but that I am cautious of appearing forward and precipitate. But I can assure the young ladies that I come prepared.
Hi.
At present,
Beautiful.
I would say,
Late afternoon sunshine in Southern California.
He was interrupted by a summons to dinner, and the girls smiled at each other. They were not the only objects of Mr. Collins's admiration. The hall, the dining room,
Sonnets,
and all its furniture
86.
were examined and praised, and his commendation of everything would have touched Mrs. Bennet's heart.
Was it the proud full sale of his great verse, bound for the price of all too precious, that did my ripe thoughts in my brain in hearse, making their tomb the womb wherein they grew?
But he was set right.
Was it his spirit, by spirits taught to write, above a mortal pitch that struck me dead?
And that her daughters had nothing.
No,
in the kitchen.
neither he, nor his compeers by night giving him aid, my verse astonisher. He, nor that affable familiar ghost which nightly gulls him with intelligence, as victors of my silence cannot boast. I was not sick of any fear from thence. But when your countenance filled up his line, then lacked I matter, that enfeebled mine.
And therefore started a subject in which he expected him to shine.
Quick question.
By observing that he seemed very fortunate in his patroness.
A compeer is a companion, an associate.
Huh. How's it spelled?
Compeers, compeers.
Eloquent in her
Thank you.
The subject elevated him to more
I know a thing or two about cars, and sometimes buying them can make you tight in the chest. But with
he had never
Hi.
in his life
Well, there's something a little special
behavior in a person
today's sonnets.
Such affability and condescension as he had himself experienced from Lady Catherine. She had been graciously pleased to approve of both of the discourses which he had already had the honor of preaching before her. She had also asked him twice to dine at Rosings, and had sent for him only the Saturday before to make up her pool of quadrille in the evening. Lady Catherine was reckoned proud by many people he knew, but he had never seen anything but affability in her. She had always spoken to him as she would to any other gentleman. She made not the smallest objection to his joining in the society of the neighborhood, nor to his leaving the parish occasionally for a week or two to visit relations. She had even condescended to advise him to marry as soon as he could, provided he chose with discretion, and had once paid him a visit in his humble parsonage, where she had perfectly approved all the alterations he had been making, and had even vouchsafed to suggest some herself. Some shelves in the closet upstairs. Well, that is all very proper and civil, I am sure, said Mrs. Bennet, and I dare say she is a very agreeable woman. It is a pity that great ladies in general are not more like her. Does she live near you, sir? The garden in which stands my humble abode is separated only by a lane from Rosings Park, her ladyship's residence. I think you said she was a widow, sir? Has she any family? She has only one daughter, the heiress of Rosings, and of very extensive property. Ah, said Mrs. Bennet, shaking her head, then she is better off than many girls. And what sort of young lady is she? Is she handsome? She is the most charming young lady indeed. Lady Catherine herself says that. In point of true beauty, Mr. Berg is far superior to the handsomest of her sex, because there is that in her features which marks the young lady of distinguished birth. She is unfortunately of a sickly constitution, which has prevented her from making that progress in many accomplishments which she could not have otherwise failed of, as I am informed by the lady who superintended her education and who still resides with them. But she is perfectly amiable, and often condescends to drive by my humble abode in her little phaeton and ponies. Has she been presented, I do not remember her name, among the ladies at court? Her indifferent state of health unhappily prevents her being in town, and by that means, as I told Lady Catherine one day, has deprived the British court of its brightest. Her ladyship seemed pleased by the idea, and you may imagine that I am happy on every occasion to offer these little delicate compliments which are always acceptable to ladies. I have more than once observed to Lady Catherine that her charming daughter seemed born to be a duchess, and that the most elevated rank, instead of giving her consequence, would be adorned by her. These are the kind of little things which please her ladyship, and it is a sort of attention which I conceive myself peculiarly bound to pay. You judge very properly, said Mr. Bennet, and it is happy for you that you possess the talent of flattering with delicacy. May I ask whether these pleasing attentions proceed from the impulse of the moment, or are the result of previous study? They arise chiefly from what is passing at the time, and though I sometimes amuse myself with suggesting and arranging such little elegant compliments as may be adapted to ordinary occasions, I always wish to give them as unstudied an air as possible. Mr. Bennet's expectations were fully answered. His cousin was as absurd as he had hoped, and he listened to him with the keenest enjoyment, maintaining at the same time the most resolute composure of countenance, and except in an occasional glance at Elizabeth, requiring no partner in his pleasure. By tea time, however, the dose had been enough, and Mr. Bennet was glad to take his guest into the drawing room again, and when tea was over, glad to invite him to read aloud to the ladies. Mr. Collins readily assented, and a book was produced, but on beholding it, for everything announced it to be from a circulating library, he started back, and, begging pardon, protested that he never read novels. Kitty stared at him, and Lydia exclaimed. Other books were produced, and after some deliberation he chose Fordyce's Sermons. Lydia gaped as he opened the volume, and before he had, with very monotonous solemnity, read 3 pages, she interrupted him with, Do you know, Mama, that my Uncle Phillips talks of turning away Richard, and if he does, Colonel Forster will hire him. My aunt told me so herself on Saturday. I shall walk to Meryton tomorrow to hear more about it, and to ask when Mr. Denny comes back from town. Lydia was bid by her 2 eldest sisters to hold her tongue, but Mr. Collins, much offended, laid aside his book and said, I have often observed how little young ladies are interested in books of a serious stamp, though written solely for their benefit. It amazes me, I confess, for certainly there can be nothing so advantageous to them as instruction. But I will no longer importune my young cousin. Then turning to Mr. Bennet, he offered himself as an antagonist at backgammon. Mr. Bennet accepted the challenge, observing that he acted very wisely in leaving the girls to their own trifling amusements. Mrs. Bennet and her daughters apologized most civilly for Lydia's interruption, and promised that it should not occur again if he would resume his book. But Mr. Collins, after assuring them that he bore his young cousin no ill will, and should never resent her behavior as any affront, seated himself at another table with Mr. Bennet and prepared for backgammon. Chapter 15. Mr. Collins was not a sensible man, and the deficiency of nature had been but little assisted by education or society. The greatest part of his life having been spent under the guidance of an illiterate and miserly father. And though he belonged to one of the universities, he had merely kept the necessary terms without forming at it any useful acquaintance. The subjection in which his father had brought him up had given him originally great humility of manner, but it was now a good deal counteracted by the self-conceit of a weak head, living in retirement, and the consequential feelings of early and unexpected prosperity. A fortunate chance had recommended him to Lady Catherine de Bourgh when the living of Hunsford was vacant, and the respect which he felt for her high rank and his veneration of her as his patroness mingled with a very good opinion of himself, of his authority as a clergyman and his right as a rector, made him altogether a mixture of pride and obsequiousness, self-importance and humility. Having now a good house and a very sufficient income, he intended to marry. And in seeking a reconciliation with the Longbourn family, he had a wife in view, as he meant to choose one of the daughters, if he found them as handsome and amiable as they were represented by common report. This was his plan of amends, of atonement for inheriting their father's estate, and he thought it an excellent one, full of eligibility and suitableness, and excessively generous and disinterested on his own part. His plan did not vary on seeing them. Miss Bennet's lovely face confirmed his views and established all his strictest notions of what was due to seniority. And for the first evening, she was his settled choice. The next morning, however, made an alteration, for in a quarter of an hour's tete-a-tete with Mrs. Bennet before breakfast, a conversation beginning with his parsonage house and leading naturally to the avowal of his hopes that a mistress might be found for it at Longbourn, produced from her, amid very complacent smiles and general encouragement, a caution against the very joy. Let's go! To say she could not positively answer, but she did not know of any prepossession. Her eldest daughter, she must just mention, she felt it incumbent on her to hint, was very likely to be very soon engaged. Mr. Collins had only to change from Jane to Elizabeth, and it was soon done while Mrs. Bennet was stirring the fire.
So,
Elizabeth, equally next to Jane in birth and beauty, succeeded her, of course. Mrs. Bennet treasured up the hint,
shalt be deposed
and
to
trusted
set
that she
me
might soon
light, and place my merit in the eye of scorn. Upon thy side, against myself, I'll fight, and prove thee virtuous.
Every sister, except Mary, agreed to go with her.
With mine own weakness being best acquainted, upon thy part I can set down a story of faults concealed,
for
wherein
thither
I
Mr.
am
Collins had
taken.
followed him after breakfast,
That thou,
and there
in
he would
losing
continue,
me, shall win
nominally
much
engaged
glory.
with one of the largest
And I by
folios
this will
in the
be a
collection,
gainer too,
but really
for bending all my loving thoughts on thee, the injuries that to myself I do, doing thee vantage, double vantage me.
Mr. Bennet exceedingly.
Such is my love. To thee I so belong, that for thy right,
and though prepared, as he told Elizabeth, to meet with folly and conceit in every other room of the house, he was used to being free from them there.
Sounds very contemporary.
His civility, therefore, was most prompt in inviting Mr. Collins to join his daughters in their walk, and Mr. Collins, being in fact much better fitted for a walker
as
than a
promised,
reader,
yesterday,
was extremely
I'm going to
pleased
do two sonnets now back to back, 89 and the wonderful sonnet.
in pompous nothings on his
One of my
side,
very, very
and civil assents
So,
of that
here we go.
of his cousins, their time
Sonnet
passed till they
89
entered
and
Meryton. The attention of the younger ones was then no longer to be gained by him.
Say that
Their
thou
eyes
didst
were immediately
forsake
wandering up and down
me
the
for
street
some
in quest
fault,
of the officers,
and I will
nothing less than a
comment
very
upon that
smart
offence.
bonnet indeed, or
Speak
a
of my
really new
lameness,
muslin
and
that
I
shop
straight
window could
will
make.
halt. against thy
attention of every lady was
reasons,
soon called by a
making
young
no defense.
man, whom they had
Thou
never
canst
seen
not,
of most
love,
gentlemanlike
disgrace me
appearance,
half
walking
so
with
ill,
another
to
officer
set a
on the other
form
side of the
upon
way.
desired change.
The officer
As
was
I'll
the
myself
very
disgrace,
Denny
knowing thy
concerning
will.
whose return from London
I will
Lydia came to
acquaintance,
inquire, and he found,
strangle,
as he
and look
passed,
strange,
all
be absent from thy walks, and in my tongue thy sweet beloved name no more shall dwell, lest I, too much profane, should do it wrong, and haply of our old acquaintance tell.
And fortunately had just
For thee,
gained the pavement
against
when the
myself,
two gentlemen
I'll
turning
vow
back
debate,
had reached the same spot.
for I must ne'er
Mr.
love
Denny
him
addressed them directly
whom thou
and
dost
entreated
hate.
permission to introduce his friend, Mr. Wickham, who had returned with him the day before from town,
90.
and he was happy to say had accepted permission
Then
to their call.
hate me when thou
As
wilt,
it should be, for the
if
young man
ever,
wanted only
now.
regimentals to make
Now,
it completely
while the
charming.
world is
His
bent
appearance was
my
greatly in his
deeds
favour. He
to
had all
cross,
the best
joined with the spite of
fine
fortune,
countenance, a good
make
figure,
me bow, and do not
pleasing
drop in for an
The introduction was
after
followed
loss.
up on his side by a happy
Ah,
readiness
do not,
of
when my heart
conversation,
hath escaped
a
this
readiness at the
sorrow,
same time
come in the
perfectly
rearward
correct
of a
conversation.
conquered woe.
And the whole
Give
party
not a
was
windy
still
night,
standing
a
and talking
rainy
together
morrow,
very
to
agreeably,
linger
when the
out a
sound
purposed
of
overthrow.
horses drew their notice,
If thou wilt leave me,
and Darcy
do
and
not leave me
Bingley
last,
were
when
seen
other petty griefs have done their spite.
distinguishing
Within
the
the
ladies.
onset come,
The two gentlemen paid
so shall I
rapid
taste
and
it
began
first,
civilities.
the very
Bingley was the
worst
principal
of
spokesman,
fortune's
and Miss
might,
Bennet the principal object.
and other
He was then, he said, on his
strains
way
of
to
woe,
Longbourn, on
which
purpose
now
to
seem
inquire after
woe,
her. Mr. Darcy corroborated
compared
it with
to
a
loss
vow,
of thee.
and was beginning to determine not to fix his eyes on Elizabeth, when they were suddenly arrested by the sight of the stranger. And Elizabeth, happening to see the countenance...
Ladies, here's the secret to sleeping cool this summer. I used to wake up feeling so hot in the middle of the night. I just really wasn't getting quality sleep at night. You know when you have to constantly flip the pillow over to get...
Mr. Wickham, after a few moments, touched his hat, a salutation which Mr. Darcy
I wasn't familiar
just
with this
deigned
until I began looking at it.
What could be the meaning of it?
And
It was
it just struck me as an example of how sometimes what Shakespeare writes can sound
in another minute, Mr. Bingley,
extraordinarily
but without seeming to have noticed,
as if
passed,
he wrote it
took leave
yesterday.
and rode on with his
And
friend.
this sonnet has
Mr.
that
Denny
feeling,
and Mr.
so
Wickham
I'll
walked
try and
with the young
capture
ladies
that
to the
while
door
keeping
of
the
Mr. Phillips's house,
structure
and
of
then
the
made their
sonnet
vows in spite of Miss Lydia's
Here we go.
pressing entreaties that they should come in, and even in spite of Mrs. Phillips throwing up the parlour window and loudly seconding the invitation.
Some
Mrs. Phillips was
glory
always
in
glad
their
to see her
birth,
nieces, and the two eldest,
some
from their
in their
recent
skill,
absence, were particularly
some in their wealth,
welcome.
some
And she was
in their
eagerly
body's
expressing her
force,
surprise at their sudden return home,
some in
which,
their garments,
as their own carriage
though
had
newfangled
mentioned,
ill,
she should have known
some in
nothing
their
about.
hawks and
If she had
hounds,
not happened
some
to see
in their
Mr.
horse,
Jones's shop boy in the street,
and
who had told
every
her that they
humour
were not
had
to
his
send any more
adjunct pleasure,
drafts
wherein it
to
finds
Netherfield,
a joy
because
above
the
the
Miss
rest.
Bennets were come away,
But these
when her
particulars
civility was
are not
claimed towards
my
Mr.
measure.
Collins by Jane's introduction.
All
She
these
received
I
him with her
better
very best
in one
which he
general
returned
best.
with as much more,
Thy
apologizing
love
for his
is
intrusions
better
without any previous acquaintance with her,
than
which
high
he could not
birth
help flattering himself, however,
say
might
that
be
right
justified by his relationship to the young ladies who
Thy
introduced
love
him
is
to
better
her notice.
than high birth to
Mrs.
me,
Phillips was quite awed by such
richer
excess
than
of
wealth,
reading.
prouder
But her
than
contemplation of
garments
one stranger was
cost,
soon put to the
a
end by
more
explanations
delight
and
than
inquiries
hawks or
about
horses
the
be.
other, of whom, however,
And
she could
having
only
thee
tell her nieces
of
what they
all
already
men's
knew, that
pride
Mr.
I
Denny
boast.
had brought him from London, and that he was to have a
Wretched
lieutenant's commission
in
the
this alone.
Shire. She had been watched
Thou
for
mayest
the last
take
hour, she
all
said,
that
as he
away,
walked up and down the street,
and me most
had
wretched
Mr.
make.
Wickham appeared, Kitty and Lydia would certainly have continued
William
the
Shakespeare
occupation.
sonnets.
But unluckily,
2020.
no one passed windows now except a few of the officers who, in comparison with the stranger, were become stupid,
Hi,
disagreeable fellows.
working on 92.
Some of them were to dine with Phillips's the next
Come to
day, and their
realize
aunt
that
promised to
92
make
is
her
an
husband hold on
absolute
to it
continuation
and make
of
him an
91.
invitation
So
also.
what I'm going to do is read the last two lines of
This was
91
agreed to,
and then
Mrs.
turn the
Phillips
page and
protested
go
that they
on
would
into
have a
92.
nice,
I think
noisy
you'll see
game
what
of
I'm
lottery
getting.
tickets and a little bit of hot supper afterwards. The prospect of such delights was very cheering, and they parted in mutual good
So,
spirits. Mr. Collins
91
repeated
ends.
his apologies in quitting the room.
Wretched
and was
in
assured
this alone,
unwearying-
that thou mayst take
unwearying
all this away,
that they were
and me most wretched make.
As they walked home, Elizabeth related to
But
Jane
do thy
what she
worst
had
to
seen.
steal thyself away, for term of life
Though Jane
thou art
would have
assured
defeated either
mine.
or both,
And life no longer than thy love
that they
will
appeared
stay, for
to
it
be
depends
wrong,
upon that
would have
love of
defended her.
thine.
That was it. But though Jane would have
Then need
defended
I not to
either
fear the
or
worst of
had they
wrongs,
appeared to
when
be
in the
wrong, she
least
could
of
no more
them
exclaim,
my life
"Such
hath
behaviour, her
end.
sister."
I see
Mr.
a
Collins,
better
on
state
his
to me
return,
belongs
highly
than that
gratified
which on
by
thy
admiring
humour
Mrs.
doth
Phillips's manners
depend.
and politeness. He
Thou
protested
canst
that,
not
except
vex
Lady
me with
Catherine and her
inconstant
daughter,
mind,
he had never
since that
seen
my
her,
life on thy revolt
for
doth
she
lie.
had not only received him with
Oh,
the
what a happy
utmost
title
civility,
do I
but
find,
even
happy
pointedly
to have thy
included him
love,
in her invitation for the
happy
next evening,
to die.
although utterly unknown to her before.
But what so blessed
Something
fair,
he supposed might
but
be
what so
attributed
blessed
in
fair,
connection with them,
that fears
but
no
yet
blot,
he had never met
thou
so
mayest
much
be
attention
false,
in the whole course
and yet
of
I
his
know
life.
it not.
Chapter 16.
See it
As no objection was made to the young people's engagement with their aunt, and all Mr. Collins's scruples of leaving Mr.
So,
and Mrs. Bennet for a
before
single evening during his visit
read
were
Sonnet
most steadily
93,
resisted, the
I want
coach
to
conveyed
just
him and his 5 cousins at
remind
a
us
suitable
all,
hour to Meryton,
me in particular,
and the girls had the pleasure of
what the
hearing,
last
as they
line
entered
of
the
Sonnet
drawing
92
room,
was.
that Mr. Wickham had accepted their uncle's invitation
All this
and was
away.
then in the house.
Sonnet.
When this information was given, and they had all taken their seats,
Thou mayest be
Mr.
false,
Collins was at leisure
and yet
to
I
look
know
around
it
him and
not.
admire. And he was so much struck with the size and furniture of the apartment that he declared he might almost have
So
supposed
shall
himself
I
in
live,
some
supposing thou art
breakfast
true,
parlour at
like a
present.
deceived husband.
Comparison that did not at
So
first
love's
convey much
face may still
gratification,
seem
but when
love
Mrs.
to
Phillips
me,
understood
though
from
altered
him
new.
what Rosings was,
Thy looks
and
with
who
me,
was its proprietor,
thy heart in
when she
other
had
place.
listened to the description of
For
only
there
one
can live no
of Lady
hatred
Catherine's
in
drawing
thine
rooms,
eye.
and found that the chimney
Therefore
piece
in
alone had
that
cost
I
£800.
cannot know
She
thy
felt
change.
all the force of the compliment,
In many
and would hardly have
looks,
presented a
the
comparison.
false heart's history is writ in moods and frowns and wrinkles straight.
Guys, oh, my glasses.
But heaven in thy creation did decree that in thy face sweet love should ever dwell. Whate'er thy thoughts or thy heart's workings be, thy looks should nothing thence but sweetness tell.
Dumped out.
How like Eve's apple doth thy beauty grow.
I thought I'd just read
If
all
thy
the
sweet
so that
virtue,
it will be saved, and the live streaming.
last couplet again.
Since we all.
How like Eve's apple doth thy beauty grow.
So,
if thy sweet virtue
I thought I'd do it again.
answer
So if you
not,
call it the live stream,
I
that's
show.
you already saw this or heard this. So, as you
Hi.
Chapter
Sonnet
16.
94.
As no objection was made to the young people's engagement with their aunt,
They that have power to hurt and will do none, that do not do the things they most do show, who, moving others, are themselves as stone, unmoved, cold, and to temptation slow, they rightly do inherit heaven's graces and husband nature's riches from expense. They are the lords and owners of their faces. Others but stewards of their excellence.
Try cheesy, crispy, Ritz cheese crispers.
Is to the summer sweet, though to itself it only live in demand. But if that flower with base infection meet the bases weed, outbraves his dignity. The sweetest things tell silence. Mirrors the festival, smell
Enjoy. So, sonnet 95. How sweet and lovely dost thou make the shame which, like a candle in the fragrant rose, doth spot the beauty of thy budding maid. Oh, in what sweets dost thou thy sins empty? That tongue that tells the story of thy days, making lascivious comments on thy sport, cannot disgrace the kind naming thy name, blessed. Some say thy fault is youth, some wantonness. Some say thy grace is youth and gentle sport. Both grace and faults are loved of more and less. Thou makest faults graces that to thee resort. As on the finger of a throned queen the basest jewel will be well esteemed, so are those errors that in thee are seen to truths translated,